Primary ignition.
Hey, this is Obi Tahi. I play Dr. Pershing, and you are watching the Virtual Cantina Network.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another week of the Virtual Cantina Watch-Along. We have a very special episode tonight, especially considering the fact we're days away from the Virtual Cantina family vacation, which is absolutely crazy. But before we get to our very special guest for the night, running Chewy tonight is Jeff. How are you, sir?
Good. Ready to go.
Fantastic. And Skip, how are you, sir?
Doing wonderful. Excited to be here.
Mm-hmm.
So as many of you know, we're hawking the Trek tonight. We're watching First Contact, which honestly is one of my all-time favorite Star Trek movies. Considering I'm a big fan of the Lapidus and Borg storyline. But we're very happy to have with us model maker and ILM extraordinaire, John Goodson, joining us. John, how are you, sir?
I'm good. Thanks for having me tonight. Yes.
Oh, it's an absolute honor. And you too can meet John next week in San Francisco with us at Boonta Eve Special Edition Creators of the Star Wars Universe. So we're very excited. John will be joining a great panel of creators with us. Very excited about that. But John, thank you for being part of our event that we're going to have next week. I know we have a lot of fans who are very excited to see you and talk about the whole building of your models and your entire career.
Yeah. Well, I like talking about it. So.
Yeah, you did a great interview with the Skywalkers. That was awesome.
Oh, cool.
I really enjoyed that one a lot. They're very cool as well. So.
Well, one just came out yesterday that Mike Ikuda did about 2001.
Oh.
I did some a little bit. We taped for 2 hours. There's like 40 seconds of me talking on there, but overall, if you're into 2001, it's pretty good. It's on YouTube, but I don't have the specifics. But it just came.
We'll search for it.
John, how'd you get into this? How did you get into this? What brought you to this industry?
When I was 3 years old, I saw the episode of Lost in Space called The Derelict. And it had the Jupiter 2 being taken into that big alien spacecraft. And once it was inside, the Jupiter 2 was like full screen, and it comes in the dark and it lands. And I was so entranced by that. And it just seemed like the coolest thing. And I always say this, but my idea was if I could get the TV apart, I could get this thing out. It's so cool.
Kid mentality.
Yeah. And it was funny because it was sort of rumored that was the 10-foot Jupiter 2. And there was like a 9-inch Jupiter 2 and a 2-foot one, and then a 4-foot one, which was the primary model. But then there was always this talk of the 10-footer, but it was like a unicorn. It was like, did it really exist? And Gary Kerr, Gary works with Mobius and Polar Lights a lot, and he kind of oversees all the details on the Land of the Giants model kits or Voice of the Bottom Sea or the Enterprise. And Gary was our resource at the Smithsonian when we were refurbishing the 11-foot Enterprise from the original series. And Gary's the go-to guy for information on that. He has studied it all his life. And Gary tracked down the 10-foot model down in Southern California and went down there with Bill George, and we went and visited it. It was in this guy's garage, and it was just huge.
Wow.
And it was so big. It's sitting on a regular table, and there was a door for the Chariot or the space pod, one or the other. You could stand up into it. It was that big.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was what got me interested, was the Jupiter 2. And then Star Trek came along, and somebody gave me a copy of the Making of Star Trek book. And so I got right away this stuff wasn't real, but I was totally fascinated. And I was really interested in Space 1999. That came out in 75.
Oh, my mom loved that show.
Well, and Brian Johnson did the effects on that. And Brian had worked on 2001. And the stuff for TV, it was amazing, the quality of the work. And I was at the grocery store with my grandmother, and there was a magazine. Starlight magazine was on the the shelf. It was issue 7, and it had blueprints of the Eagle from Space 1999, the primary spaceship, and it had some pictures of Brian Johnson and Nick Alder holding the models. And it was like, that was gold, because there were no DVD extras. There were not many making of books. There just wasn't information like that. So to see pictures of the miniatures with these guys holding them, it made it apparent how big they were. So I begged her to buy me this magazine, and it had Star Wars on the cover, which I didn't know what that was. And after I got through looking at the Space 1999 stuff, I'm looking at the Star Wars stuff. I'm like, this looks really interesting. So I was there opening day. And not long after that, I started writing letters to Lucasfilm going, hey, I want to come and work for you. I'm 14. I'm like, I want to work for you. And they're like, thanks for writing, but yeah, we're not going to hire you. And the letter's on file, so it's all good. So, yeah.
Did you say that you were somewhere and found that letter?
I did, yes. There was, ILM was a whole series of, it was in a small industrial park. And over time, ILM took over more and more of the businesses as they left. And they'd leave the signage and stuff for the old businesses, which just confused people that were looking for it because nothing made any sense. And one of the warehouse spaces, like a 2,000 square warehouse space, was kind of off-site, and it was called Faraway Bay. And they decided they were going to let that go. And Jeff Mann was running the model shop, and he said, go over there and see if there's anything we want to keep. So I went over there with the keys, opened the door, and, you know, that's that thing where you open the door and the light shines into it, and you're like, oh, my God. And what was in there is full-size snow speeder, mine cars from Indy, about 8 speeder bikes, the sand skiff, a giant Rancor arm. That's the stuff that comes to mind. And then there were big 4-foot boxes full of Ewok costumes, Stormtrooper costumes, and there were boxes and boxes of that. And then on the other side of that, there were all these wood patterns that we wanted for the model shop. And in the far back right-hand corner was a little box about 6 inches square with a bunch of letters crammed in it. I thought, I wonder if my letters are in there, and they were. So I got the letters back, you know, years after I was working. But yeah. They were on file in a cardboard box in a warehouse nobody goes to, but yeah, they were on file.
That is so cool.
That's
like
an
full
amazing
circle.
Story.
Yeah.
The fact that somebody didn't throw them in the trash after they received them from you.
It's, you know, they weren't stored with care, but they were stored.
Yeah, they were,
at least they weren't round filed, so that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Made for kindling or something like that.
So when you said you went to see Star Wars when it first came out, what was your initial impression when you saw it?
Holy shit.
It pretty much
blew my mind because, you know, I mean, it was so different from everything else. It didn't look like Star Trek. It didn't look like Space 1999. That used universe feel, you know, it was mind blowing. I mean, I think we all experienced the same thing. Probably the first time you see it, you're like, oh my God.
Yeah, we've never seen anything like that.
Yeah, this other person, it seems totally real. You know, it was all believable. And the level of world building, that's one of the things that's so interesting about Star Wars all the way through. Everything has to be designed, everything has to be created. You know, there's basically very little that's found that's in it. So it's a complete world. And I love the fact that Star Wars is such a great example of where you can look at something and you can see it go from its, you know, original inception where it might be a napkin sketch or, you know, just something really crude, and it transitions into what you finally see on screen. And one of the there's a lot of documentation of that stuff in the Star Wars universe. They've done a lot of artwork and maquettes and all that stuff. So I really love it.
It sounds like the Dave Filoni school of storyboarding, because he tends to do that a lot on napkins and pieces of paper. So we understand that.
Yeah, you know, it's so interesting to see it all. You know, and it's interesting to see the different artists. You know, like Ralph McQuarrie's influence on it, and Joe Johnston and Nilo Rodis. And you go into a whole nother generation of people that are working with Doug Chiang, you know, and watch the transition over the past almost 50 years now. Pretty good.
It's amazing how cool that the ability for like Doug to interpret his ideas in a way that might have been what Ralph McQuarrie would have created, because there's a very similar style I feel in a lot of that stuff. That it's very reminiscent of the original stuff. And then it's new and a little different, but it's got that whole complete vibe of the original Star Wars. So
it's funny because when Doug started working at ILM, because we came in around the same time. But I remember on Back to the Future 2, I sat and he would just draw for me. I'd sit and watch him. And it was really interesting because I went to design school and we did ideation class. We would draw with markers and everything. And Doug was self-taught, and it was really interesting because Doug would put the construction lines in after he drew. which usually you put down the construction lines, and
Right.
that's the drawing. He would do that as
Base.
an added effect. After
Ah.
it's done. Like, damn,
That's a
this
trip.
guy, the construction, he doesn't need the construction lines. He can draw this stuff. So yeah, he's amazing. And Ralph was amazing. It was really fun. Ralph was such a nice guy and so humble. And he always fascinated me because he was just this older white gentleman that just, I had these preconceptions about what, somebody his age would be like. And that's not how his brain worked at all. And the way he saw stuff, it's just amazing. And the execution of his stuff was it's just phenomenal.
I really love how true to some things George remained when he actually did the production. So, he did alter things. The original kitty cat, the original Luke and Vader with their scuba mask kind of thing, all changed a bit, but that just not much in terms of how close to what he drew originally. But a lot of the ships are very similar, and down to the details. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's funny because Ralph did a lot of the matte paintings of the Death Star. And if you sit and look at them, they are absolutely incredible. And the Death Star is a hard thing to render. It's a big gray thing with gray details.
Right.
But his execution on the matte paintings is unbelievable. And when we were doing Rogue One, we were going back and looking at Ralph's paintings as inspiration because he worked out what that all looked like. And he was so phenomenally talented, and such a nice man too. So
You got to work with him, or
he spent a lot of time with us in the art department during the prequels.
oh, cool.
Yeah, we come in to visit pretty regularly. We had Ray Harryhausen came and spent a day with us.
Wow.
Sid Mead came in one day and spent a day with us.
Nice.
On those days, we didn't get a damn thing done. We just it's like 10 of us sitting with Sid Mead. And I remember in college, I was going to school at North Carolina State, and I wanted to go see Sid Mead. He was going to be in Georgia. And everybody's like, yeah, we'll go do it. About the time it was time to go, nobody would go. And so I didn't wind up going to see him. And art department, there were like 10 of us, and Sid Mead. And I'm like, this is way better than the thing in Georgia. Got to spend the whole day hanging out with him. It was great.
Oh, yeah.
One of our regular hosts, Dave, who's in San Diego this week. I think he actually went to NC State. Personally, I'm from Asheville, so I'm just down the road.
Okay.
But I remember that. I tell people all the time, because I was 9 years old when Star Wars came out, and my dad drugged me to the movies that night. He had to coax me in, saying that I could bring one of my friends with us to go to the movies, and we went there and met my aunt and her husband at the time. And I remember somebody that was there had been in, it was the days where you could go to the movies and just stay there and watch it again. And somebody had been there and said, "Oh man, wait till you see this, wait till you see this." And I tell the people that grew up, some of my cousins, my kids and stuff like that are of the next generation. I said, you don't understand, because they're like, well, what's so special about it? I said, you don't realize up until that moment, what you grew up being used to this kind of creation. I said, and when we saw this, it had never been done before. It was all new. And that's why it was so mind blowing. You see all this stuff now and it's kind of like, yeah, it's just the next phase. But it was like from nothing to 100 when that movie came out. It was amazing.
I mean, that opening sequence, it was changed the industry in itself, because you had, the Tantive-4 with the Star Destroyer following in,
That's
the
amazing.
opening sequence. It's
Such a classic shot.
Yeah. But if you have any questions for John, please put it into the chat. We actually just got one right now from Troy, and Troy asked, how much, if any, of Colin Cantwell's stuff did you encounter?
Well, I mean, I've seen all the concept models that still exist, and the majority of them still exist, and they're in really good condition. So, there's the version of the Princess ship, there's the Death Star, there's the Sandcrawler, there's the Land Speeder, the X-Wing, what else? The Skyhopper.
Oh, yeah.
They're all still there, and it's interesting because I met Colin a few years ago, and it was really interesting because I couldn't quite tell how with it he was. I always say the lights were on really bright, but I wasn't sure there was much in the rooms. But he was really excited, and he was signing his artwork, and he has artwork of, of the X-Wings and stuff like that. And according to his handler, he was really integral to Close Encounters. He worked on that, and he worked on 2001, and supposedly he's who came up with the classical soundtrack for 2001 as a temp track, because they had a soundtrack composed for it, and Kubrick rejected it and went with the temp. And supposedly Colin came up with that. And, you know, Colin's stuff, it's kind of crazy when you look at it, because it's so different from what we're used to. But you can see, I mean, the Sandcrawler in particular and the Landspeeder, they don't relate at all to what went up in the film. But things like, you know, Princess Leia's ship, you can see that in his concept model, the X-Wing, the Y-Wing. They're very clearly, you know, they're iterations of what we're used to. So he was the jumping off point for all that stuff. So yeah, I really admire his stuff, and he was a really neat guy. He passed away maybe 2 years ago.
He was a nice little nod to him in season 3 Mandalorian. One of the ships, they call it a Cantwell class.
Star
So that was great. It's like half of us who knew exactly what it was are like, okay, we get it. You know, there's a nod to those who, you know Star Wars, which is fantastic.
It's funny. I knew they were doing that, and I told Colin that, hey, just so you know, keep your eyes open, because your Star Destroyer is going to wind up in one of the episodes. And he's like, really? Yeah. I don't know if he actually saw it or not, but I told him. So
that's cool.
That's absolutely great. So, as we mentioned at the top of the episode tonight, we're going to be watching First Contact. But like I said, my earliest memories of Star Trek were watching Next Generation with my father, and my father was a diehard Next Generation fan, and that's where I got my love actually for the Borg, who I think is probably the coolest villain in Star Trek as far as a group is concerned. So this movie is right on my alley. How did you get involved in this particular film?
Well, I had been the model supervisor on Generations, and this was the next film that we got, and I just did the same job again. So I had worked on Star Trek 6 as model maker, and I came in when I first visited ILM. It was 1986, and they were doing Star Trek 4, and I had a friend, Tony Hudson, that I went to high school with. Tony got a job in the creature shop, and he called me up in North Carolina and said, "Hey, guess where I am?" And I was like, "Okay, I'm gonna come out." And I spent 5 weeks sleeping on his couch, and he lived pretty close to ILM. And I couldn't go to the model shop, but I could go to the creature shop, and they were working on the whales.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we went to a place, we went to San Mateo and filmed in a high school pool that was, I think it was 14 or 15 feet deep, and it had a room downstairs with a window.
Oh, that's
so
awesome.
Don Dow was down there with the video tap and everything.
Sort of like a regular tank that you would film in, right? Kind of reminiscent of that. But
yeah, that kind of thing. You had a great view of everything. And Pete Romano was the cameraman. Randy Johnson was camera assistant. Toby Heindel. And so it's Pete on the camera, and then Randy and Toby were going to get in the whales, and they'd bring them to the start position, and they'd let them go. And they figured out pretty quick the whales could swim back faster than those guys could get to them. Because they were free swimming 4-foot animatronic whales, and they were designed by Walt Conti, and Walt had a company called Edge Innovations. And I was just over at Douglas and Sturgis in Richmond, and Douglas and Sturgis is a company that sells art supplies, casting stuff, silicones, urethane foam, all that kind of stuff. And they're a great supplier. They've got one store in Richmond, one in San Francisco. But I pulled up the Richmond store the other day, and all the molds from Free Willy are outside.
Oh, jeez.
And these are full size. And like one of them, the full size orca is 25 feet long.
Oh,
they lifted it up on end with a forklift. They used a 55-gallon drum as the funnel. And there's 3,500 gallons of urethane elastomer they poured into that mold. So all one pour. It's like it doesn't even seem like that would work, but they were able to make it work. Because he did stuff on was it Sequest? No, what was the thing that Spielberg had? Was that Sequest with the submarine show?
Yeah, Sequest. I remember that show. Holy cat!
He did the dolphin. Then on Perfect Storm, he did Swordfish and Sharks. He did the shark or the Snake and Anaconda. I'm not sure what else. And then the Free Willy films. I think there was more than one of those films. So the last thing I heard he was doing, he was making these landers for Jim Cameron, because Cameron did that deep dive to the bottom of the Marianas Trench.
Right.
And Walt made landers that they sent down beforehand to scope out the area that the camera was going to be in. So that's the last thing I heard he was doing. And I guess Edge closed, and that's why the molds were sitting over there. But pretty impressive to see him. Huge.
Sounds like it.
Yeah, but the Star Trek whale, the first whale, it had an umbilical, it had wires going to it. And by the time they got to production, actually doing it, they had 6 whales that they brought to the school, and they would run for about 20 minutes before something would happen. And it was kind of neat because the way they work, you could unzip the skin down the belly. It kind of popped up like a Ziploc. And you put them in the water and get the air out of them. And then we were putting pocket change in them to make them neutrally buoyant. And once you got them like that, then off to the races. And you got about 20 minutes out before the battery died or something happened to it. But you lost sight of the fact that they weren't real really fast. Because when you're up at the top of the pool looking in, it's like you're at SeaWorld or something, you know?
Right. That's amazing.
So, yeah. So I don't know where we start off with the question, but.
We were going through how you got involved with First Contact and you worked your way back. Yeah. Star Trek 4.
Trek 4 is the first thing I was involved with at all, and I wasn't being paid. I was just out. And then Star Trek 6 working on that, and then Generations, I was the model suit, and First Contact, I was the model suit. And then Greg Jean, I don't know if you know who Greg is, but Greg was the model supervisor on Close Encounters in 1941, and he worked with Chris Nolan a lot, worked on a lot of the Star Trek films. And Greg was working on Next Generation. And he called me up one day and he goes, I built a shuttle. Bill George designed a shuttle that we had in Star Trek 6 that you see going up to the space dock. And I built the model of it. And I packed it up and put it in the crate with the Excelsior. And Greg called me up one day and he goes, if I ship you that shuttle, can you change it into a 1,000-foot cargo freighter by next Thursday? And I'm like, yeah, you know. So he sent it, you're supposed to send it overnight. And it didn't show up the next day. But I started thinking about it. The windows on that were cut out of the hull. And they're pretty big. And that's going to be a thing that defines the scale. I had another armature and I had the vacuum form pattern. So I started making one that was completely clear. So I could tape off the windows and kind of make the scale, make it look bigger. And the thing didn't show up. And I called Greg and I said, hey, it didn't come. And he goes, oh, shit. And he goes, I guess I'll have my guys make something. I said, well, I got one
I already started
right now. I can have it for you by Thursday. Do that.
Yes.
Yeah, he said if the other one shows up, it's yours. I'm like, okay. So shipped that one down there, and that was on the episode Relics that had Jimmy Scotty comes back. So that was Scotty. Yeah. So about 3 weeks later, this FedEx box showed up, and it looked like it had been dropped from orbit. It was beat all to damn pieces, and it was the shuttle from Star Trek 6. Oh, wow. So I went up with that one. They went up with the Gentleman, and it's funny because the Gentleman was the name of the ship, and Greg called me. He may have spelled it, but, it was an all-night thing. And I put in dry transfer. I'm like, I think I did JENOLAN, NCC 2010 he wanted. And it turns out it's JENOLIN for these Gentleman caves that are in New Zealand or something. And I read about it on the internet where it was like, it's not spelled right. I'm like, well, I didn't know it was in any way critical. And it was like, it was a free job. So
it was paid off to be proactive in that case, it seems.
Yeah, well, it was funny, too, because I was having lunch with Rick Sternbach, and he was sketching something on a napkin. I said, what's that? And he goes, oh, that's a Iridian destroyer. I said, oh, is it going to be in an episode? He goes, well, it would be, but we don't need money for it. And I said, well, I'll do it if you pay for the materials. I'll build a model. Okay, so I built that one for him, and that was season 6. I think The Chase was the episode. And it appears on screen. They were like, Captain, something's appearing off the port valve. Worf's talking, he goes, and it blows up almost instantly. He goes, "Because you're Iridian destroyer." I'm like, you never even saw the damn thing.
Oh, well, it was there. That's all that matters.
Yeah.
Just real quick, I want to remind everybody we're watching Star Trek First Contact. It is available streaming on Paramount Plus. I believe you can also rent it on YouTube if you don't have a DVD copy. But be sure to get ready to queue up your episode, the movie, because we're going to start watching in a few minutes.
No, it's funny you said they said it was going to arrive on Thursday. You're talking about Generations, when the big joke in Generations is it doesn't come until Tuesday. So,
Prime also good.
Yeah.
Cat's trying to flip my iPad over.
Cats will do that.
Yeah.
It's available on Prime too, Jeff.
Yeah, that's what Troy is saying. So
very
good
cool.
to know. Give people some options.
So as far as when they were putting this film together, were they storyboarding? Were they taking and coming up with the models and everything of that nature? Were they getting a lot of influence from, for example, the whole Laputa storyline from the television show, and translating it to make film, or was it completely different?
I don't know the origins a lot because John Eves was doing the bulk of that stuff. And so, we were getting, they're basically approved designs that are coming in for the Enterprise. And Rick Sternbach was drawing the blueprints for us because we were building a physical model of it. And the model was 10 feet long. And so we had John's original sketches, and like the Borg Cube was just some sketches, and the Borg Sphere was some sketches. The Cochrane ship, it was interesting because we had just gone out to Davis Monthan Air Force Base and the Pima Air Museum in Tucson for Phantom Menace. We did kind of went out there to just look at all that stuff and take pictures of all the aircraft parts as inspiration for the pod race stuff. And while we were there, we went over to Green Valley, which is not too far away, and there's a Titan II missile silo. Well, a month later, they're in there filming First Contact. Mm-hmm. So I didn't know, but then I'm like, well, I got reference of the missile, and so that was really kind of neat. And so we'd get John's sketches, and it was taking those and doing the same thing we do for Star Wars, where get a sketch and you extrapolate that into the finished product. And something like the Titan II, there's a lot of information for a Titan II, so we knew exactly what we had to build there. And the warp ship, we had drawings, we had John's drawings, but it was part of it was trying to fit it inside the missile because it all had to fit inside that, and it didn't really fit in the end. We had to cheat it, and it was funny because one of the shots, you see the Titan missile come up, and it opens, and that was that thing they had it on the opening to Enterprise every week. But you see it open like flower petal, and the Cochrane ship comes out of it. And Apollo 13 had come out not long before that, and they had done the lunar module extraction, and you saw the rocket body open, the 4 panels come off, and then take the limb out. And I was trying to find information, how'd they do it? Well, they did it. And that wasn't really an option for us on this. So what we wound up doing was we shot the Cochrane missile in two pieces. There's the front half that contained the missile, and there's the second stage behind it. So the front half, what we did is we made a hexel, an aluminum ring, and we put stepper motors on that, and we ran wires to the 4 sections of the missile. And those stepper motors would open the 4 pieces. So we shot that as an element. Right. We shot the second stage as a separate element. Those were combined, and then the Cochrane missile was shot as a third element and combined with all that. So if you looked on the off-camera side, because on the right side you can't really see it, the 4 pieces didn't really meet up. There's a gap on that side, but you didn't see it, so no.
I know, see you talking about it. Right. So we're at the time right now. So everybody, please queue up however you're going to be watching the episode, and Jeff will start with the 10-second countdown whenever you're ready.
Yes, sir. Here we go. All right. Paramount logo. Oh,
every time I see the Paramount logo, I keep on thinking it's going to be an Indiana Jones movie that's going to fade out. It could be like an anthill.
Show an actual mountain.
Yeah, or an anthill or something like that. Yeah. This is directed by Frakes, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Which is a nice hit, if you're a Star Trek fan, knowing that the second in command, is directing another movie just like Nimoy did. Like you were talking about Star Trek 4, which I was very excited about being fans of Star Trek 4, to be by the Golden Gate Bridge and all that. But yeah, it's pretty awesome. And some of I thought the best episodes of not only just the Next Generation, but Frakes directed some of the episodes of the Orville as well. And he's just so talented.
Yeah, it's funny. He did some episodes of NCIS, and I had some friends that were helping out on that and just loved working with him. Just loved it. And I met him. I only met him after we were done with the movie. We were down at Paramount for a screening. I met him and Patrick Stewart. And it was funny. I was with Craig Barron. And Craig walked up to both of them and just started, "Hey, Patrick and Jonathan, this is John Goodson. He was the model supervisor, blah, blah, blah." And they were super nice. It was really great and everything. And after they kind of made their way into the theater, I said to Craig, I'm like, "Wow, it's pretty cool. You know those guys." He goes, "I don't know those guys."
That's funny.
He used you as a way to introduce himself.
Yeah, it was pretty funny.
Actually, this movie strikes me as being like the first film that had nothing left over from the original series or the first few movies. I mean, it really was. It's. I mean,
It's all
the
about the next
characters.
generation.
Our bad guy was the the Borg, which did not exist in the OG series. It was a really unique and first kind of, okay, this is all fresh new material. Even though it was in Next Generation, it still was fresh from the old series.
Yeah, they cut the cord.
Yes, it was definitely a cut the cord kind of movie.
Well, they did. Once they killed off Kirk in the previous movie, it was kind of like, well, the torture's been passed.
Oh yeah.
It's funny. Shatner is so not happy with how that went. He would like to play Kirk again.
Oh, here we go.
Well, also, I mean, if you remember from like Star Trek movie lore, Spock always said, "Well, when you die, you're going to die alone." And this movie happened. I'm like, wait, but Malcolm McDowell was there, Patrick Stewart was there. So what was Spock really envisioning?
That's called writer's inconsistency.
Get a little of that other places too.
Yeah, happens a lot.
So, did you build any of the cube?
We built the cube exterior. This was done. I can't remember who this was. I can't remember his name. Sid. But this was a matte shot that they did, and we didn't have anything to do with this. So this was done. Wish I could think of his name, but they did this part. We did the cube exterior, and we did the sphere, and we did the missile, we did the Enterprise, the solar observatory was in Generations, and then we had, I think that was the bulk of it. The Enterprise was a big deal because it was 10 feet long, and they wanted to be able to see in the windows and see depth inside of it, and that turned out to be a bit of a thing. But yeah, just watching the girl go through his eye.
Oh yeah,
yeah, that's pretty freaky.
He still had a little bit of a color in his hair then.
Nah, he wasn't fully gray yet.
Yeah, I'm working on that myself.
I went down, I don't remember what year it was, but went down when Next Generation was on the air and got to spend an afternoon on the sets there. And man, that was amazing. Because we went through the side of a turbo lift. And it's door on the side of it. And then we had to pry the doors open. We were recarpeting. It was between seasons. But you walk down the corridor, and on the one stage, everything's interconnected. Transporter room, sick bays down there. There's a crew quarters, and it was really interesting. We walked in the transporter room. Everything's on and percolating. And you could pull their panels on the back wall. You could take off their halo and magnets. And all the optical isolinear chips are in there, and everything's doing its thing. It was amazing.
That's cool.
So really nice sets. This was the first shot we did of the Enterprise, and it comes up and it goes, you got to mount it somewhere. We had the mount rod coming out of the shuttle bay, and it comes up and you kind of see that. And Kim Smith, who was our lead painter, Kim went out and was painting the rod against the shuttle. So the shuttle bay back there, so you couldn't see it.
Nice.
And it's funny, the Enterprise changed from shot to shot at the beginning because it was shot in sequence, and it sprouted docking ports behind the bridge that were for, like what you saw in Star Trek: The Motion Picture where the Vulcan shuttle docks to it. Those popped out there. The tops of the engines changed in the third shot. Details were changing because the model wasn't quite done when we started filming it.
oh wow.
And it's funny, this conference room, I think this is just a redress of the existing conference room they had with the windows that arch overhead. And when it was Next Generation, we walked in there, and it's funny because the back right side of it runs right, it's like 10 inches from a roll-up door. So when you walk in and you see that, it really wrecks the illusion of its starship. And at one point, they actually had curved glass in those windows. And so for a while, in a couple of seasons, you saw reflections. And that was really neat. And then a light got dropped that went through one of the windows, and they were so expensive, they didn't want to replace them, and so the glass went away. So... And then it was funny when Voyager was being made, we walked into Janeway's ready room, and they went, "You see anything familiar?" I'm like looking around, I'm like, "Oh yeah." They took 10 forward, they cut it in half, they turned it upside down, and it became the front wall and the ceiling of Janeway's ready room.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
Great
repurposing of stuff. That's amazing.
Yeah.
and this had that such a dark tone in the lighting. We're so used to Next Generation being bright and shiny and new, and then they went with even the uniforms with the gray and the black instead of the reds and yellows and blues.
Yeah, it's interesting too because on Next Generation, they had all those stickers, those long stickers rounded in. Mike Akuda made those up, and they usually had a number, and they'd say something, and if you read them, it was like crazy stuff that was on them that Mike put on there. But on this film, all of those stickers were metallic, so they had a very different look to them as well, and that was such a defining thing. They used so much line tape on Star Trek as dressing, and those stickers were on everything. And it's funny because Microwave's got one of those stickers on it in here because and I was talking to Mike, and his Microwave's got one on it too.
That's funny. I'm gonna go grab my phone. I'll be right back.
Well fun. Leave on some of your changes in the design of the updated Enterprise or anything of that nature, or was that very much like they handed that to you and you just followed suit?
Well, it was interesting because we had John Eve's original sketch, which was on an 11 by 14 page, and then Rick Sternbach was drawing blueprints for us, and Rick drew the saucer, and he drew the lower engineering hull, and then the drawing stopped coming, and I called him and said, "Hey, what's going on?" He goes, "Oh, I'm on contact. I'm up in Seattle." I'm like, "Well, what are we supposed to do about the back end of the ship?" And he goes, "Well, I don't know." So I called John and I said, "Hey, man, what are we going to do?" And he goes, "I'll just use the sketch kind of as a guide." So we kind of mocked up the engines on the sketch, and I called him up and said, "We got a problem." He goes, "What is it?" And I said, "It looks like the Enterprise being chased by 2 4x4 fence posts, what it looks like." So he said, we talked to Herman Zerman, and they said, just, run with it. So the struts and the engines, we just kind of extrapolated from what was there and kind of cleaned them up. And it was funny because I had a guy named Ed Marecki working for me, and Ed's a really good model maker. And we needed something on the strut for detail. And I had 2 66 Ford Mustangs, and Ed was driving one and I was driving the other one to work. And the 66 has got a detail on the rear quarter panel. It's chrome. It looks like 3 vents with these chrome spikes. And we're driving in. We got out of the car one morning, and I said to Ed, "Copy that and put it on the strut." So it's on the inside and the outside of the strut. It's basically part of the 66 Ford Mustang.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, and then the engine.
Go ahead.
Oh, the engines. The front of the engines. Oh, this is funny. The shot of the Borg cube. I remember we're in dailies, and Bill George called out something. He goes, "What's that?" Somebody said it's a paint atom. So this thing's only 30 inches across. But yeah. And what the hell was I talking about? I'm going back to.
Oh, you're talking about on the Enterprise.
The front of the engines. So the front of the engines, initially, they were just these big red 3-sided shapes. And what we had inside of that was a thing. It was a stepper motor that turned a thing that looked kind of like a little chicken leg made out of Mylar tape. So it had a lot of variation to it. And then we had 6 projection bulbs. They were like these medical exam lights. We had 6 of those in there that pulsated, and the chicken leg turned, and you got this pattern, which is very typical original series Star Trek. The M5 computer, that kind of stuff, where you see the colors scrolling across something, backlit. So that was the effect we were getting, but the problem was you're seeing the shapes and stuff go all the way across the front of the engine. So I made this cap that went over it that closed. It covered the center, and it just had windows on the side. So you saw the red interactive lighting just on the sides of it, so it kind of saved the effect. So we had a lot of latitude there, but in the paint job too, we didn't have a lot of direction on that. So we kind of tried to do something tasteful. Yeah. And this is the
first time that they've really done the more elongated nose to Enterprise, where it'd all been saucer shaped for the most part up until now, and then they elongated it for this Enterprise.
Well, and you had the D that was elongated side to side, and here it's elongated front to back.
How many versions of the Enterprise did you work on?
We refurbished the original with the Smithsonian. Then we had the motion picture one on Star Trek 6. We had the Excelsior, which we converted into Enterprise B, and we had the 6-foot D, and then building the E. So the only one I didn't work with directly was the C, and we had it on this movie to potentially use for some of this battle sequence stuff. but that was it. I mean, I was around it, but I never worked on it. But the only one I worked on. Where the Borg sphere is coming out of the cube.
Yeah.
It's funny because that was added really late. We'd already had the cube on stage and we were shooting it. And they came out and said, we're going to have a door on it. I'm like, a door? They're like, yeah, this round ship's going to come out of it. I'm like, we didn't build a door or anything like that on it. And so we had to retrofit on stage and put about a 6-inch door, a round door on there that had an internal tube, and it had a 4-way door that opened. So it had a center part that went vertical, the bottom went vertical. They went away from each other and the sides went out at a 45-degree angle. And then you see the sphere come out. Well, the sphere was shot as a separate element and composited in. And when that door was added, it was done so last minute and so fast. And there had to be an interior inside that tube when the door came open. And I just grabbed a piece of 20 thousandths thick styrene, which is really thin. And I glued a tank tread and some other kit parts on it. And I sprayed it with some black primer. And then I took a silver Prismacolor pencil and drew some lines with a ruler on it. And I curled that thing up and put it in the tube and let it snap open so that the camera side, it's curved in that direction. And that's what you see in the shot. And if you look at it, you can actually see the silver pencil lines in there. It tells you how big it is. But,
that's great.
Yeah, and the whole sphere thing was a very late addition.
Gotta love practical effects.
Me too. It's funny because I think it looks better. I mean, digital allows you to have the capacity to do virtually anything. And they're incredibly powerful, and you can do amazing stuff with it. But to me, there's something a little bit more visceral about real things. And it's not a simulation of light interacting with it. It's the light interacting with it. It's real, you know? Yes. And so you get so much for free just by it being a physical object. And a lot of times they're working on a project and they do a digital iteration and there's a practical version of it. What ends up happening is the practical version will drive the look of the digital one because they have to mimic what's real. And so it gives them a really good baseline. It's a good idea no matter what, but it gives them a really good baseline of what lighting interaction looks like with the real
right. Amazing.
So I love how rustic this looks. Like they're sitting on kegs, you know.
Oh yeah.
It's like almost like steampunk-esque.
Yeah.
And James Cromwell, like he's like in every movie, every TV show. It's just funny seeing him in this.
He's very prolific.
Yeah.
It's funny. I missed the guy that played Cochrane in the original TV series. And he wouldn't have been good in this part. Cromwell's a perfect fit for it, but I missed that guy. It was kind of that's who I thought we should be seeing, but he passed away.
He was very good as Prince Philip in The Crown.
Oh, Cromwell?
Yeah.
He's good in everything. He's good in everything I've ever seen him in. It's funny, when they get in the Cochrane ship and they're taking off in the missile.
Yep.
Between Geordie and Frakes, or Geordie and Jonathan Frakes, is a sunglass display thing. It's white plexiglass that's backlit, and it has the rack for putting the sunglasses in it vertically. That's what's between them. That's part of the
repurposing stuff is amazing.
It always bugged the hell out of me, though. I'm like, really? Come on.
Yeah. Sometimes it's funny when they kind of go the easy route as opposed to building something.
What about this?
Like, yeah. I mean, we go back to the original Star Wars movie. If you go to the cantina scene, you got a Doctor Who outfit. They've got they grabbed some bugs.
Werewolf.
They got a space suit, like a NASA space suit. Like it's like
yeah. And Demon got a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
It's funny. Somehow I'm more forgiving of Star Wars because it's such a unique universe. It's kind of like, okay, all right, whatever. They got werewolves and demons. All right, fine.
It's funny how kind of diverse Star Wars has always been, and then when it gets, the newer stuff gets diverse, people somehow have a problem with it. But it's like you've already had like every species of every whatever, variations of everything.
Yeah, it's funny because George talked at the Cannes Film Festival. He did like an 1.5-hour interview, and he talked in there about how the only people that are what am I looking for? Discriminated against are the droids, and everything else is recognized equally, but the droids are definitely discriminated against, which is
lower class kind of thing.
Yeah, Yeah, we don't serve that kind in here. That kind of thing,
When
Well,
the-
that was that was the whole joke when they went back to the Mos Eisley Cantina in the Book of Boba Fett. It was run by droid.
Yeah, whole droid bar. That was pretty cool.
I was watching the Borg sphere blow up, and because I've got the volume down, I could hear in the back of my head the music that was playing when the Death Star blew up in A New Hope.
I'm forever ruined of knowing how they did the color for the transporters of a glass of water with a bunch of glitter and spinning it, and that's how they filmed it. I'm like, no, that ruined it.
That's
Yep.
funny.
The magic.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes not knowing the trick just keeps the illusion alive.
Oh yeah.
But
It's like
knowing the
that-
trick is always very cool. It's amazing to know the behind the scenes stuff and how things were accomplished.
Well, it's like that rib that they did in Spaceballs where President Screw decides to beam from the next room over and his head's backwards.
It's like butts in the front. Yeah, that wasn't.
Well, this is funny. This is the missile silo. This is Green Valley, Arizona. And this was
So
really
that's
The whole silo was there. It was not just the
it's the
missile-
whole silo. The
Oh,
whole
wow.
Now, did you put a lot of trash in there, or was that stuff all sitting around?
That stuff they dressed in there because
Yeah,
when I went in there a
set
month
dressing.
before, it was pristine. You go in and see the missile and everything was in order. So they've dressed it to look like it's been attacked, and that nose cone fit over the actual missile nose cone.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Sleeve right over the top of it. So
I wonder how many things they had to sign to make sure that nothing happened to it. Covering all of it.
Yeah. Well, the doors are closed on the silo, so it's not open to the outside, so they can lock it up at night.
Was
But
there
only-
a live elements to the missile? Like, were they worried it was
No.
going to explode?
It's been demilitarized.
Yeah, I would hope so.
Yeah, it was part of the START treaty that they had to actually take the missile out, defuel it, and cut a big hole in the side of it. And they leave it out for 90 days, and the Russians photograph it by satellite, confirmed it's demilitarized, put it back in.
Ah, interesting.
Wow.
It's interesting, too. Well, there are a bunch of docents that were working there, and they seemed genuinely disappointed that they worked there when it was active, and they were genuinely disappointed they never got to fly their bird. I'm like, if we flew the bird, we wouldn't be here visiting
Yeah.
the museum, but,
Would have had the apocalypse, as it were.
Yeah, that's funny. That engine nozzle right there, that's something that Paramout brought in. That was not the way the Titan's set up.
I met Gates in Raleigh at a GalaxyCon convention. They had practically everybody there except for Picard, Patrick Stewart, and Jonathan Frakes, who I'd seen the year before. He and I share the same birthday. But I build houses for a living, and I got in this long conversation with Gates McFadden about these custom doors that she wanted built in her house, and how much she thought they should cost, and how would you do it, and so forth. And we got into this long conversation of custom doors. So
Mhm.
Interesting.
yeah,
That's really cool to actually get to connect to somebody like that on something that's real
Yeah.
and have that kind of connection to them. That's pretty neat.
she was like, "Well, what do you do for a living?" I said, "I build houses." And she's like, "Oh," she goes, "I'm getting my house remodeled," and she was all excited about it. And I was like, it was embarrassing because there's people behind me, and I'm thinking, somebody else is going to want to get your autograph besides me. And we got talking about it, and
But they're not
Never-
going to get custom doors.
yeah, this is true. They're not going to be. I was like, well, if you give me the sizes, I really could get these built, and we'd stick them on a truck and drive them out to California and put them in for you. And it was, she was like, I'm really kind of, what should I do? And so it was kind of funny. I was giving her advice.
That's pretty cool.
That's usually your in, Skip, because how many
Yes, my
guests at Comic Cons that you've talked to about building them their houses or giving them advice for it. So
it does create some conversations.
This sequence right now where he's touching the missile.
Mhm.
I work a lot with museums these days, and there's this big conversation about the importance of having physical objects. And I always kind of think about this scene because it's why physical objects are so important, to have in a collection, as opposed to, having a video clip about it. It's like, no, have the real thing with the video clip with it. Use that to support the real thing. But the real thing is really important that people can see that, and maybe if they can
touch and feel is very important.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what was your thought when you found out that they put an X-wing in the Smithsonian?
The full size one?
Oh, they put Poe Dameron's full size one in the Air and Space Museum at the Smithsonian.
Well, it's funny because there was a Naboo fighter back when Phantom Menace came out. I thought they gave one of the N1 starfighters to the Smithsonian. They had one there in the castle in DC, and I went out there for this whole press event with it. And then the Smithsonian had 16 affiliate museums back then, and it traveled around. But ultimately, it seems that it came back to Lucasfilm. So I was kind of surprised it came back. But at one point, I remember they were going to raffle one of those off, and they talked about it. And then it was like, who the hell wants one of these things? It's 34 feet long and 25 feet wide.
On top of your house.
It's huge. They're huge.
I got 9 acres. You know, it's.
I'd ship it to you, Skip.
Well, it's funny too because the starfighters, we dealt with this when we're building the miniatures, because we built some that were 47 inches long, and then we had the Queen ship. We had a 2-foot version of the Queen ship I built in the art department, and we had that vacuum metallized for the chrome. But then we built an 11-foot model, you know, for the wide shots and everything, and we could not figure out how we're going to chrome this thing. It's 11 feet long. And we were trying out, coming up with all kinds of ideas, and ultimately we used Mylar. And then the fronts of the engines were actually solid aluminum. They were machined by Brian Dewey. And the back, the tail spikes, they're like 3 feet long, and they are as sharp as a damn needle. That thing was lethal. And when, you know, my concern was if it's sitting on a table out on stage and somebody walks out on the stage in the dark, they will impale themselves before they even know they did it.
Oh, geez.
So yeah, we had these plastic tubes with caps on them. Right. We kept on them at all times because it was just so damn dangerous.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So for everybody at home right now, also if you check out Light and Magic, which is the documentary on Disney Plus currently, there's some great interviews with John on there as well. Did you know that you were really part of that documentary, or did they just gain canned footage from you?
Oh, they had canned footage, but we sat down for about 3 hours with Lawrence Kasdan.
Oh, nice.
And it was great. It was really fun. And it was funny because he was remote. He was down in LA, and we were actually at the old ILM facility in San Rafael in the wood shop. And he was on a monitor next to the camera, and he was life size over there. And it was funny. When he came in and sat down, he was sitting in his home library. And I was like, as soon as he started talking, I said, "What's behind you?" And he goes, "Oh." My friend's right. He goes, "Well, my composer on all my films, he always binds all the music and gives me a binder. So these are all the soundtracks from all my films, and this is this, and this is this." And I said, "Well, when we get done with all this, you have to have us over." And he goes, "Okay." And so flash forward a couple months later, it was done, and we were down at Star Wars Celebration in Anaheim, and they were going to do a presentation about it in their big amphitheater thing. It was like 7,000 people, 7,000. Yep.
Many of us were there, probably.
Okay. Well, right before it started, I worked in there. Greg Gresby, who's the head of PR at ILM, and Greg's a really good friend of mine. Greg goes, "Lawrence Kasdan's got COVID. Don't tell anybody. We're not going to tell anybody." I'm like, "Okay." So I go sit down and everything, and then, you know, and Ron Howard's on stage, and Rose Degnan and Joe Johnston, everybody's up there. And Kasdan comes in on the big monitor up overhead, and he goes, "Hi, everybody. Sorry, I tested positive for COVID." I'm like, "Well, I guess the cat's out of the bag now, you know." But
at least it was him telling him.
Well, I said to Gresby, I said, "What's going on?" Because he was having a rap party at his house. I said, "What's going on at the rap party?" He goes, "I don't know what's going on at the rap party. I don't care." I'm like, "Okay." So, and I was asking different people. I asked Dennis Muir, and he's like, "I'm not going. He's got COVID. I'm not going." And so we went, and we go to his house, and he had it in his backyard, and it was really great. Had dinner, and they made milkshakes for us and everything. And he's upstairs. We're talking to him through his bedroom window because he can't.
Oh, geez. So he's self-isolating at his own party. That's funny.
Yeah, I know. It's like, geez, we got to come to the house and everything. We can't actually talk to you. It's like, but then he called FaceTime, so we got to talk to him like that. But yeah, it was great. It was so comfortable talking with him. We got a blast doing it. So yeah, it was really neat. And I love the fact that they covered the stuff with the Razor Crest and doing the motion control photography on that series too.
So I love the story that you told me, and maybe you could tell our viewers right there about that they were going to do this Mandalorian exhibition at Anaheim Celebration, and you ended up driving Laser Crest in the back of your car down to Anaheim.
Well, that was, yeah. So they're like, so we want to take the models down and set them up, and because they had this thing called the Mandalorian Experience,
Yes.
and it was a whole
I
big
missed
stage. It was really cool. And the thing that was funny was I got down there and they were like, well, we'll get you a pass to the show and everything. I said, I don't care about a pass to the show. You're going to pay me. I mean, I was working on a show called I'm a Virgo for Amazon, and I had to take the week off to go down and set all this stuff up. And they were like, we'll get you a pass. I'm like, I don't care about a pass. I care about getting paid. So I mean,
a week.
Well, I just stood and watched the models all week. So I stood in the dark with the models in front of me. And it wasn't until like day 3 or 4 that I realized this thing, I thought this was it, that the Mandalorian Experience was the whole thing. And I went out into the Anaheim Convention Center, which is enormous. And it was the whole damn place. I could not believe the scope of it all. So
we lost Spencer.
Spencer does that time to time.
Sorry, you're gonna act like Skip, or let's put you in Spencer's spot.
Yeah, we'll put you in Spencer.
It does, this StreamYard is weird when it comes to arranging people, so we'll get you back in your spot when Spencer returns. But that Mando experience, I at that con,
couldn't get in. I was there in Anaheim and I couldn't get into it.
I did not make it in as well. I'm very disappointed. I saw some amazing photos and videos of people, interacting with Grogu in the back of the N1, and a lot of really cool stuff. But I was surprised that there was no official thing in that part of the convention center, because that was the brand new section of the convention center, and they had like the store upstairs or something, and that downstairs, I believe. And then the rest of the halls were obviously the main con, and then queues for like the big arena area and all that fun stuff. And so we tried to get in on the last day, and they had just capped the line like as we walked up, and I was very, very disappointed at that point, because I should have tried to jump on it immediately when they announced it early on in the show, and I kept kicking myself for that.
It was really something, because they had the full-size N1 Starfighter in the middle of it, that piece, and they had Grogu in there, and there were 3 people from Legacy Effects, and they were sitting where I was, so I go back and talk to them. And Grogu, they could see people. And so when people waved to it, Grogu would turn and wave to them. It was totally interactive.
Yeah, I saw some amazing videos that some people posted with that kind of interaction with Grogu, and how amazed they were that there was somebody actually manipulating the puppet from, off camera, so to speak, behind the scenes. They also had that, the big puppet of the Bantha as well.
Yeah, they had everything. They had the cockpit of the Razor Crest. They had the Starfighter. They had a lineup of speeder bikes. I mean, they had, you name it, costumes, and they had the throne, the Jabba throne that Boba Fett sat in. But it was a really great comprehensive show, and it was funny because they had the lineup of speeder bikes, and I was like, we're standing there before it opened, and I was like, man, those are amazing. And one of the guys goes, go walk around the back, and I walked around the back, and he goes, see where the forklift hit it?
Oh, jeez.
Speared it. Well, it's a 3D print, and it's it's like this skin that's like 20 thousandths thick.
Oh,
come inside. Well, the forklift went through it like it was made out of like a macaroni noodle. It just plowed right through the thing. And I'm like, I worry that there won't be anything left of those in 5 years, that they're gonna deform and come to pieces. But they look damn good from the other side.
Yeah, as long as you have decent one side that's decent, that's all that really matters, probably.
Yeah. Well, what Spencer was asking about was taking the models down there, and they said, we're going to take the models down, and they were going to have the Teamsters do it. And I was like, wait a minute. I said, I deal with this a lot now. You either use art handlers, you don't use Teamsters, use art handlers, or I'll drive them down. And they said, well, why don't you take them? So I loaded them on my
cut out the middleman.
Yeah, I took them all down. I felt funny back in my little pickup truck into the loading dock with all these tractor trailers and offloading the models. It was kind of...
Yeah, that was that's a trip. Those the Anaheim was awesome. I because of the fact that the proximity to you weren't as close, but the Manhattan Beach studio is not far, and the majority of the cast and crew are here already in Southern California. I'm in West LA, and that kind of added to the ability to have that happen. And it's like I wonder if they will be able to do something like that again. I really look forward to them having another sort of amazing display of props and stuff at a future celebration.
I wouldn't be surprised if they don't do it again. I think Favreau really was a big fan of that. You know, he really liked
I'm just worried that getting it somewhere else would be the issue, really.
Don't
like
think
you
you're going to
said,
see it in Japan.
Yeah, that would be awesome. A lot of us are going to be at Celebration Japan next year, so
I'm not driving the model in Japan.
So
see, that's the thing is logistics when it comes to where they're going to have it. But hopefully at the next Anaheim one, they could be in another amazing display, if not maybe somewhere else in the country.
Yeah.
So we must be past Spencer's bedtime, and he just used bad Wi-Fi as a way to get off.
No, he'll be back. He said his internet crapped out. He's working on it. I told him we'll survive without him for the most part until he gets back. But yeah, it's funny that you went to Star Wars Celebration and ended up spending the entire show for the most part in the display area.
Well, it's funny. I saw these people's pictures on Facebook of the models, and you'd see me in the background with my arms crossed, kind of standing. Well, this guy came in from Disney. He came in, he was in a suit, and he had the little earpiece thing. And he came in, and the models were on a platform that was maybe 2 feet tall and 30 feet long, 10 feet wide. And it was kind of a long corridor. They're funneling everybody in, and they're going on either side of this thing. And this Disney guy comes in, and he starts orbiting the table. And he's just going around. After about the 30th time around, I kind of went, hey, come here. He came over, I said, what are you doing? He goes, I'm judging everybody. I'm like, well, you're knocking it out of the park, buddy, you know? So he was like, so he came back after a while. We got to be pretty good friends. And he's like, my father was in the military. My grandfather was in the military. I wasn't, but I have their demeanor. I'm like, yeah, you do. You got it. You got that down. So he taught me how to silently judge. So I stood around the side and watched. And the reason was because Greg Jean, I was wanted to build a model of the Vulcan shuttle from Star Trek: The Motion Picture, and there is next to no information about that thing. There was a model kit and a handful of photographs, but it disappeared from the Earth. And Greg and I went to dinner one night. There was a Chinese place down the street from his house, and we're at dinner. I said, I'm looking for information on the Vulcan shuttle. He goes, after dinner, I'll show you something. After dinner, we go back, and he had 2 houses that were side by side with 2 two-car garages, and they had 5 storage units, and they were full of stuff. So we go in one of the houses, and we would go in the hall, and he goes, okay, we're going to go in this room, but we're going to have to push the bookcases away from the wall and go behind him. And I'm like, okay.
Uh-oh.
We open up the door, we push the bookcases in, we can get behind him, and I'm in the lead. And I get to the corner, and I get my right foot out. And there, sitting on an end table on a piece of rubber foam that has turned the color of a navel orange. It's this bright orange, and it's disintegrating. The Vulcan shuttle is sitting there, and it's also just parts of it are just disintegrating. And I was like, what the hell? And he goes, it got stolen from a convention, and it went through multiple people, and I wound up buying it. But it had been sitting on that piece of rubber foam for probably 25 years.
Wow.
So I told that story to production, and I said, sometimes this stuff goes to conventions and it gets stolen. So that was why I was like, you're going to pay
Keeping an eye on stuff.
Yeah. So, but that was why, because I couldn't believe it. I mean, there was.
I remember they were doing a Mandalorian panel at that celebration, and I remember watching Filoni about have a heart attack when the chopper got too close to the stage.
Yeah, chopper rolled up.
He goes, that's very expensive. Let's move it back from the edge of the stage.
He got spooked like he thought Chopper was going to roll off the front of the stage as he came out, because he went in front of the table and was doing his little chopper thing, which was
never going to happen, because there would have been about 30 fans that would have ran up there and caught him.
That's so funny. The other night, Dave's birthday, they had a birthday party for him up at the ranch about 6 weeks ago. And Chopper was there. And I was looking at him, and I saw the guy who was operating him. And I went over, I said, did Michael McMaster build this? And he goes, yeah. He goes, I was just on the phone with him a little while ago. I'm like, really? He goes, yeah, there's something wrong with it. And I said, well, what's wrong with it? And he goes, one of the little drive wheels has come off inside of it. And he goes, I need an Allen wrench. And I said, hey, give me a minute. And I'd gone to Harbor Freight the day before. And I picked up a set of Allen wrenches. So I went out my truck, and I got him and brought him back in. And we pulled his head off and put him back together and got him fixed, and then sent him back out into the party. But it was just kind of, yeah, it was pretty funny.
On the fly. That's cool.
Yeah.
Had your hands inside a chopper.
Well, that's sort of like what you guys are used to doing when it comes to a show or whatever, that if something's happening, you got to fix it and make it right, and then get it back out there so they can move on.
Well, it's funny because when you get on stage time is so expensive.
Oh yeah.
And you look around. I was on the Mandalorian stage. They've got one big stage that's kind of a blue screen stage because they have the volume stage.
Right.
But I was on the other stage, and it was the one that had Michael Biehn in it, and it's like this town. It almost looks like a Japanese feudal village.
Yeah, that was the one. That was from Ahsoka, right? That was.
That was the chapter 13, the Jedi, which is the one that Dave directed.
Had Ahsoka in it, but yeah, it was Mandalorian.
Yeah, and so we went in there, and what they built the center part of the town, but then the whole ceiling was blue screen, the ends were blue screen, so there was a big wall and stuff. None of that stuff was there, but there's probably about 90 feet of the village, kind of the center part.
Right.
And I was talking to Filoni, and we're sitting off on the side. And I said to Kim, look how many people are in here. Like 125 people probably. And they're not even shooting at the moment. But everybody's busy, and they're doing stuff. And I'm like, this is costing you. I wish there was like a taxi meter that you could see. It's like spinning, because the amount of money, the stage rental, the lighting package, the DP, it adds up so dramatically. And you get all that stuff on stage, and the price tag is just through the roof by the second.
Wow.
The stage is so critical. It's really interesting because you can see stuff. Things can get done on stage, and you're operating at a pace where you are shaking. It's all adrenaline, and something could happen on stage in 20 minutes that might take 2 or 3 days in the shop. But because the whole focus of the entire thing is on that problem, man, people are moving, and it's miracles happen. It's really something. I was working with Paul Houston, and Paul started on the first film on Star Wars, and Paul and I were doing a thing for Agent Carter.
Okay.
And there's a couple scenes where there's a DC-3, and you see it at night over the countryside, and there's another shot of it on the ground. Well, I actually built practical models for it, and Paul and I were down there shooting them on the stage, and he's got a handheld DSLR. We don't have any motion control equipment anymore. And he's like, I can't believe I'm doing this because we're using monofilament to move the plane. And to put a piece of masonite with baking soda for snow. And he's like, looked around and he goes, none of these people are in a hurry. And I said, I know. And because we're used to the stage, like what it was when ILM used to have a stage. And it was just so frenetic. And you look around now, it's like, it's not like that at all. It's very calm. But I get on stage and I start breathing faster. I'm like, okay, let's get busy.
Let's get this done.
Get in that mode.
Yeah.
So
welcome back, Spencer. I didn't say that.
Thank you very much. My internet crapped out, but what else is new? But no, it's very exciting to hear that story. And so, what did you think about the fact that they blew up the Razor Crest? Like after all the work he'd done. Like I felt bad for everybody. I felt bad for everybody who paid $500 for the HasLab, and it stopped. The fundraising stopped the day before that episode. But being one of the fathers of the Razor Crest, that you must be like.
Well, it was funny because Dave told me that was going to happen, and I said, "Let me talk to you for just a minute. I want to explain something to you, and that is that when Gene Roddenberry wrote Star Trek, the Enterprise was a character." Gene Roddenberry was a B-17 bomber pilot in World War II, and that's a 10-man crew. And that B-17 is the same one they got in every day, and that B-17 is a crew member to those guys. So there's a lot of loyalty to that plane. That is the Enterprise. That is why Gene Roddenberry did that. Now, when Harv Bennett got involved, Harv Bennett flew Hueys in Vietnam. You didn't get in the same Huey. You went out and you got in whichever one was available.
Right.
It wasn't precious. It was just a thing. So for him, destroying the Enterprise was not a big deal.
Right.
So I said, Dave, you are killing a primary character here. He goes, well, it's too late. It's already done. I'm like, okay, I said my piece. I tried, but that was
that's amazing.
So, but I got phone calls and stuff. What happened? I'm like, I got no control over that. That's
I build them. I don't write them.
It was quite the shock, I have to say.
I like how it blew up like a bowl of porridge, though.
Yeah, it blew up really well.
All there was a throttle in his spear, and I'm like, when you blow up a helicopter, like in Under Siege, they blow up a helicopter on the back of the battleship. There's a hulk. There's part of it left. It doesn't disintegrate into nothing,
Exactly.
But yeah, here it's like, well, I found the door lock. That's it.
Decimated.
It's just like.
Yeah. Well, that was one of the cool things, I think, for a lot of people that ended up going to the Mandalorian experience was that, there was part of it there basically. So that was very cool.
Yeah, that was pretty neat. And it was funny that it sat outside under a tarp and it didn't really protect it. And so there was a woman they brought in who refurbished that thing for that. And she did a remarkable job of bringing that thing back.
Nice. So Geordie without a visor kind of weirds me out, I have to say.
Yeah.
I really, really like the look of Geordie with those 70s disco glasses.
Yeah.
I think LeVar Burton had enough of that crap.
Yeah. Give me some contacts and call it a day.
Yeah. That had to have affected his eyesight. 7 years wearing that thing?
Oh, yeah, I would imagine.
God.
Compensating for however he could see out of there.
Yeah. It's funny, when I was visiting the Next Generation sets, we were in the engineering area, and there's that table they had that had the graphic on it that they would always stand around.
Controlled.
And then the warp core further back. There's a little alcove to the right. And these guys were back there, and what they had done, they had cut a hole through the concrete slab at the stage floor, and they were digging a hole. And so they're bringing up 5-gallon buckets full of basically mud, and they put a ladder in there. And then in future episodes, you see people coming up this ladder like they're coming from a lower deck. And I'm like, yeah, I know where they're coming from. I wouldn't go to
the nasty hole.
Yeah. And it was funny too, because they were recarpeting, and from when Kirk gets on the elevator in Star Trek II, and he gets on that, he's in engineering, and he hops on that little one-man elevator and takes him up to the next level.
Yeah.
It was funny. The carpeting off, that was still there. You could see where they put the plywood patch in and repaired it, because those sets had been there forever.
I think still that the Star Trek II is probably my favorite movie out of all of them.
It's the seminal Star Trek movie. Star Trek, what did I call it? Trek.
Yeah. Nicholas Meyer.
Well, it's like, I know at least in that fandom, it's like you either like motion picture or you don't like motion picture, or you think that Wrath of Khan is the true first movie. So
Motion picture has a special place in my heart, but Star Trek II is way better.
oh, yeah.
Oh, this is one of the most unforgivable shots in the movie. When she sees the Earth, it's like, oh, this is such a bad shot.
Oh, yeah.
It's terrible. It's terrible.
Yeah.
Digital.
In 96, it wasn't bad, but right now it's pretty bad.
Yeah. That would have been great as a practical bit. Maybe it's the compositing or the lighting, but it does look very digital.
It just looks terrible.
It could be worse. Could be the Scorpion King.
Oh, well.
God.
Or the original Spawn.
I was 28 years old when this movie came out.
This came out my freshman year of college. You're old, Skip.
I was 1 year younger than Skip.
You have been the whole time.
It's funny. This movie was so much cleaner than Generations, because we did the saucer crash on Generations.
Right.
Man, that was a damn mess every day.
How many times did they have to do that?
I don't know exactly. It seems like, we did test runs with it for a while, and those were interesting because there was on a track. There was a track underneath it. There was an I-beam, and there was a little car underneath there that the saucer was attached to, and they could control up and down, and they could kind of, tilt it up and down and that sort of thing. And there was an area they were supposed to touch down in. That platform was 40 by 90, and it was 10 feet tall. And there was an area that was the touchdown area, and we had soft material in there, so it would kind of skid through it. But they were doing a test with it, and we all walked off. And I designed that set, and I built the right side with mountains on it to save myself some money, so that way I could control the depth of the set. And so we went over and sat on the mountains, and they came roaring in with the saucer, and they touched down before the crash spot. And when they did, the saucer grabbed the plywood, and the whole platform went aside, scared the hell out of us. So but when we were ultimately shooting it, we probably did it like maybe 8 times. And one of those times we crashed through a big mirror, and it went right through that, didn't do anything to the saucer at all. And that was a quarter inch mirror. And Yeah, we did multiple takes of it coming in, but it was this whole thing of having to redress the set every day and put in. We were blowing up like 500 miniature plants. I mean, it was devastation after each take.
Oh yeah.
And we were putting concrete pigment and chromium oxide, which was a bright green stuff that Warren Peterson had found. And I was pretty sure it was not that safe to. So, but at the end of the day, we were green and black. I mean, it's going everywhere. So I would shower every day at work before I went home because I didn't want to bring that stuff home. But
yeah,
years later, Lauren goes, "Yeah, I found out that chromium oxide stuff's really toxic." I'm like, "That's what I thought."
it worked well, but
it worked great. The other crazy thing about that set was initially we had it regular green, and because we're shooting high speed, the exposure makes those regular greens go to black. So the first times we're shooting the test, we're like, "Oh my God, it looks like they're crashing on a black and white planet." So Bill George got some fluorescent green road marking paint, and we had to paint all the foliage fluorescent green to compensate for the exposure. And that fluorescent green became a natural looking green. But when you walked out there, you're like, "You guys are crazy. This looks terrible." Yeah, trust me, it'll look right on film. But
it's amazing how you had to compensate for that, especially in the moment.
Yeah, it was a bit of a head scratcher. It's like, uh-oh, this is a problem.
Sometimes those ideas come to you in that case when they wouldn't necessarily otherwise.
No, you wouldn't normally be doing that. It's funny. We had a close-up section of the front of the saucer too that you see kind of crashing through the trees, and it comes up to camera. And that thing was about 2.5 feet tall, maybe 16 feet wide, and it had a roan truss going through the back of it. And that went to a tower that was on dolly tracks on either side. So they're manually pushing this thing down and crashing through these plants. And we shot one take of that, and it came down there and crashed through plants and everything. And it comes to a rest and it stops. And this moth came out of one of the plants, and it flew up in front of the Enterprise. And it was so cool. We're like, "Oh my God, you got to keep it. It's like an alien bird." And you're like, "No." They cut it out.
No.
That's cool, though. Yeah.
Speaking of alien birds, you're probably the man to know. What the hell was that probe in Star Trek 4? I've always wanted to know, did they ever say what that was?
They never specified what that thing was. We call it the water heater from space.
I thought it was like a volleyball with a paper towel tube. That was pretty much.
That ball was about that big, about the size of a softball.
Oh, wow.
But, yeah, and the water heater thing, that just had it like drywall texture on it. It was this big cylinder with like drywall texture and a metallic paint finish. But what that was, I don't know. Same people that built the Doomsday Machine must have built that.
I remember, so I grew up in England, and I was too young to go to the theaters to go see Star Trek 4. Because we were rated 13 or 14 in London. So my parents, we took a weekend trip. They said, "Let's go to Amsterdam." I'm like, "Okay, whatever." I'm a kid. I didn't know what Amsterdam was at that time. And my parents took me to go see Peggy Sue Got Married. And my dad's like, "Oh my God, new Star Trek. I can take you to that." Ran and got his tickets. So I ended up seeing Star Trek 4 in Amsterdam because I could not see it in England.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
That's fine.
That was a fun movie.
Yeah.
It's funny. What's that?
Oh, it definitely was. It's bookends with 2 and 4.
Yeah.
I actually have a Blu-ray set that's actually 2, 3, and 4, which I absolutely love that. But one of the things I'm very excited about, and you'll see it when we see you next week in San Francisco, is our trip racers. We got shirts like the 501st done. In the back has the Golden Gate Bridge, but we have Easter eggs. In the bay has a whale tail, and going over it has like a watermark of a Klingon bird of prey.
It's very subtle.
Funny. They built a forced perspective Golden Gate Bridge out in the parking lot at ILM, and they built a water tank out there that was about 3 feet deep, and they had the stunt bird of prey with a piece of right angle steel coming off the back of the wing that went to a little carriage, and they were flying that thing on wires under the Golden Gate Bridge miniature for the crash shot. and it was not working. And I think they did something like 136 takes of it.
Ooh.
And it was like the most takes ever done at ILM, something like that. And they ended up doing a motion control shot for that shot where it goes into the bridge, and then when it actually hits the water, that's the stunt one actually hitting the water, and it looks just like what it is. But it was amazing to be at ILM and see that kind of stuff. You walk out and there's Golden Gate Bridge and the bird of prey on a wire, and everybody's prepping everything. And remember Golden Child, they were shooting the bad guy Sardo off an air cannon through a breakaway window, blasting that out. And it was such a neat place to be. I remember Pirates, you'd see people pushing the Black Pearl across the parking lot.
That's great.
So, Jeff, when you went to the museum and motion picture and saw the Dykstraplex, do they have anything like underneath it, or they just show the camera?
So they did a demo. That's the reason I went to the specific day and time I went to the museum, was because they were doing a demo with one of the original operators. Or actually, there was probably about 3 or 4 original operators or secondary operators, later versions, but all within that sort of early window. With the camera set up, the control unit for that thing was like a rolling rack about 6 feet tall with old school components in it and a tape player that had the trench run recorded onto it. They had the cassette tape that said trench run on it for That's the cool. Camera movements for that particular shot. They had somebody had let them borrow it was a 5-foot Falcon, I believe, and so they did. Yeah, so they did some demos with there was also maybe a 3-foot X-Wing, and then that was on a different kind of gimbal thing, it looked like. And then there was also they had the camera itself on the big, arm with the giant old school camera in this like kind of a cylinder kind of thing that would move along with the other movement on the track and of the arm that the camera was on. And so they were kind of replicating those types of shots, but they had the guy doing it live. I believe he was working it live there. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, the guy named Sean Sides, he's brought that Falcon down a couple times. He lives like maybe up in Washington. So he puts it in a U-Haul and he puts ratchet straps from the sides all around it, going in every direction to stabilize it in there.
I can imagine.
Yeah, Gene Kazicki provided the X-Wing, and they've got it on a blue-screen pylon.
Yeah. It was very cool. They had it set up in the one gallery, and then on one of the big wall, they had a looping thing about the entire process of, well, not entire, it was probably a couple minutes, but it was talking about the whole thing and how they had done different stuff. And I think John was interviewed during that bit, talking about it. And it was really cool. And even the guys that came out that were part of the original working of the unit were very kind of enthralled in the whole process and the video that was playing and everything. It was very cool to kind of experience.
That's pretty amazing to have it working again, because it had been kind of scavenged for parts and stuff. And
yeah, I think it was not the first one per se. At least the control unit, I believe, was like a second one or something that somebody else had, but it was basically the same. Obviously the same design for the most part and everything.
Yeah, it's been a big job for them to kind of reconstruct that.
Yeah. But it's a trip to see this, basically a electronics rack, 6 feet tall, full of stuff, and then there's like a tape, a cassette player in there as well, like you would have old school cassette player, and they had the cassette that said Trench Run. I was amazed at that. I had to get a photo of that. But it's just it makes you think about how much was involved back then to get something that we kind of take for granted nowadays.
Well, now it's so simple to do it. It's funny.
Exactly.
There was a documentary came out yesterday, the day before, on 2001, and they're talking about the whole thing with hanging the actors on wires. And what they did was they hung them vertically with the wires behind them so that you couldn't see them. but that was their cheap for doing it. And they're talking about, well, now, we can just take the wires out, it's no problem to do that stuff. But, all of the stuff, the stuff they achieved, I mean, talk about, you're fighting the technology the whole time to make it want to do it. And I did computer graphics for about 15 years. And my feeling was, you're fighting the computer the whole time. It does not want to do what you're asking to do. And people are like, you just push the button. I'm like, no. Kind of like it has a hand crank and you're pushing it uphill by hand the whole time. It's like, it doesn't want to do it.
It's amazing the stuff that, and what I think was it sort of a new idea to move the camera around the model versus the model around the camera kind of thing, or just more perfected in that?
Well, I mean, Spencer just disintegrated again.
I'll be right back.
It's funny, because I was talking to somebody about it a couple days ago that, on Star Trek, when ILM did the pilot for Next Generation, they built a 6-foot D and a 2-foot D, and ILM had an 80-foot motion control track. Well, the ship doesn't do much of anything. It's on a model mover. It might rotate, it might do that. It might do a little bit of pitch and roll. But essentially, it sits there, and the camera is on the boom. It's on the crane, and it's doing all the movement. But when you see the shot, the Enterprise comes roaring by, So after they shot the stuff for the pilot, the models went down south to a company called Image G, and they had a 30-foot track.
Oh.
Well, you can't get very far from the 6-foot model with a 30-foot track. So all you can do these shots of the Enterprise, just coming right. And they didn't like that 6-foot model either because it was really smooth. And so Greg Jean built a 4-footer in the 3rd season. And that became kind of the go-to model for them. And it was pretty small. It's funny, that last episode, All Good Things, they're kind of zooming in on the window where they're playing poker. Like, the model's not big enough for that. It really shows its scale there. Right. And I had to I just refurbished that model. I think I returned it back to Paramout maybe 6 months ago. And it was in pretty bad shape. But it looks good now. But damn, when I got it, I was like, oh, it was mess.
How things like that, they're made from materials that weren't necessarily meant to last.
Absolutely.
And then they basically, break down and whatever. And then the people nowadays are, because they used to be very disposable. Everything was thrown away, right?
Yeah. Or reused.
And now it's like, you think about, I should have kept it. And if you did, what kind of shape is it in? Like you talked about the bird of prey sitting on the, changing color, dissolving piece of foam, and the model itself deteriorating because of you would think about trying to preserve it in advance, then you might have something that's still viable.
Yeah, it's tricky stuff though, and a lot of what I do these days is conservation restoration of film models. And because I worked on the 2001 model at the Academy, that took us about 5.5 years, and we weren't working on it all the time, but it was a lot of research and a lot of trying to figure out how to fix stuff. And it's really interesting to see what goes wrong after 10, 20, 30. And there's a lot of, I've seen some models that were built for Phantom Menace, and most of them are in perfect condition, and some of them are just disintegrating. I'm like, I don't get the difference.
Was it how it was handled, or maybe some kind of environmental thing?
I don't know. I mean, they've all basically been kind of in the same environment, but different materials hold up different ways. I remember the whales, the Star Trek whales, they were made out of a urethane elastomer that was called PMC 724. It was made by Smooth On, and it was kind of like silicone. And for the whales, they had an internal core that was fiberglass, and they had a metal kind of skeletal structure that was in the tail with spring steel inside the pectorals and the tail fins. But on top of that, they had a layer of Smooth On that was just just the way it comes out of the container. You mix it up, it's pretty dense. That one had microblooms, and so it was pretty dense. It was pretty rigid. Then they had an outer skin around that was the board just as it is, which is kind of like silicone. But they were having problems with it wrinkling when the tail would move. Well, a whale doesn't wrinkle.
Oh, right.
So they ended up taking the PMC 724, and there was a plasticizing agent you could add. They plasticized it to about 120%. And at that level, the wrinkle went away, and it worked like flesh. It was beautiful. I mean, when the tail moved, no wrinkles, it looked absolutely real. But that stuff was incredibly unstable, and it broke back down into a liquid again. And like all the hoses on the speeder bike models, they all turned to goo. And there was an Indiana Jones puppet. They built a little puppet. Paul Houston made it because Indy supposedly rode on the periscope and the radar. And so they made a little puppet and they shot that stuff. Well, that puppet disintegrated. There's the metal armature still there, but the puppet's gone.
Oh, right.
Star Trek whales, there's none of the skins left. And one of those whales wound up in an acrylic case, and it wound up in Doug Norby's office, who was the president of Lucasfilm at the time. And the plasticizing agent was attacking the acrylic case. And the acrylic
From
case,
the inside?
yes, it had white bubbles coming out of it.
Oh,
and it's like, I'm like, this thing's in this guy's office. This is really not probably safe to have around.
Yeah, what is breathing that doing to him? Right?
Yeah, it's bad stuff. But yeah, I had a half piece of a tail, and I threw it on the workbench, and there's a piece of 1/4-inch plexiglass, and it landed on it. And a couple of days later, I went over there, and the tail had gone halfway through the plex. It had dissolved.
Just sort of melting through it.
Yeah.
So when you're rehabilitating those models, are you using materials that you're basing not only to look good, but also will last a little bit longer this time?
Well, it's kind of interesting because every institution's a little bit different in terms of how they handle it. And I try to use reversible materials. And the reason being, because when the 2001 model, it had a lot of paint damage, a lot of discoloration and stuff. I mean, it sat in a potting shed for a long, long time, and it was exposed to the weather. It had corrosion, and it had this stuff on it. And everybody's like, "What's that?" And I'm like, "It's the Shroud of Turin." It was a rag that had been laid on it, and the rag had imprinted into the white.
To it.
Yeah, and so there are all kinds of things to fix on it. And, we had a photograph that was taken when the model was being built in 66, 67, and it's Humbrol matte enamel paint. So we're like, we know what the paint is. And I wanted to use that and paint it back up. And, and there was some objection to that, and I got frustrated, and I contacted Ariel O'Connor at the Smithsonian, who I'd worked with on the Enterprise. And I said, I know what this paint is. I want to do that. She goes, think about it. If you do that, you have made a permanent change. That paint is probably not the same formulation 50 years later. It's not going to age the same, and you've made a permanent change to it that now you can't fix it. So it's like, that's why you use reversible materials. And the light went on. I'm like, yes. So most of the repair work I do, I use gouache, which is a water-based. It's really opaque, like a watercolor. But it's really good in terms of, especially for things ILM built, because ILM painted their models with railroad colors, which was enamel, which was very flat, very dull surface. And that was great for blue screen photography, so you didn't get blue spill on the model. Because anywhere you get that blue reflected, that's basically a hole that you would see the background through.
Oh, yeah.
So
get that with even with like a zoom, a filter like on my camera here. It's like when I move funny, you get a hole in my head or something.
Yeah, same kind of thing. So gouache is really great for it. It has that same kind of look to it. And there are a couple of other types of conservation type paints that you can adjust the gloss with and stuff. So I tend to use reversible stuff.
So reversible, you mean it can be like removed or
take water
to what it was prior to you addressing whatever the problem was.
So that way you're not introducing a new problem into it. You're sort of stabilizing it where it is. You're making it cosmetically look correct. But in 10 years, if the gouache is peeling or something like that, they can take water, distilled water, take it right back off, touch it back up, you're back in business. You haven't
what you did.
A new permanent problem.
Right. That's a trip. But yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I just had to get my head back around it. Wasn't where I was coming from. I was coming from the model maker. I'm like, yeah, we'll treat it like we're going to take it back out on stage. Like, it's not going back on stage. It's a museum object now. It's different. Like, okay.
Very much so.
Yeah. It's funny how these things went from these things that could have gone in the trash to now they're accessioned objects in museum collections. It's a whole different animal.
Well,
it belongs in
they're
museum.
definitely works of art, though.
Yeah, it belongs in a museum.
Yeah, that too.
That's what I keep saying. There's a Y-Wing sale at Heritage Auctions. There's Gold Leader. And I think the auction started today. The bidding started today. And I'm like, that definitely belongs in a museum. But
right. Yeah, I was at a motion picture memorabilia auction not too long ago, and there was a lot of stuff that really probably should. I mean, if they may have, in this case, versions of it as well, but some of them were like original stuff from like older sci-fi movies and things. Other, all different genres, including they had a bat suit from I think it was a Keaton bat suit, and it wouldn't be. It was Val Kilmer, maybe. It was the one that because they had the Schwarzenegger Mr. Freeze, that costume as well. So whatever I think it was like matching suit, but it could have been another version. But it was definitely that 89 through the 90s kind of style.
Yeah.
The prop store has become like majorly popular. That those sort of auctions are like
Yeah.
It's constant too. I mean, there's constantly stuff showing up at auction. I mean, the X-Wing Red Leader X-Wing turned up. That Greg Jean had that, but nobody knew he had it. And after Greg passed away and people were going through stuff, here's this X-Wing. And that disappeared. That was stolen in 1977, and Greg didn't take it. But the story I was told was that there was a guy, a drug addict, that was working on the production, and Star Wars hadn't even come out. Nobody knew it was going to be a big hit. He just stole it to sell to make some money to get drugs with. And they went through different hands, and I think that's where this Y-Wing Gold Leader came from. It's part of that same. So
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's funny. Going back to Star Trek: First Contact, they're here on the dish, and it was interesting because this got added late in the film, and we had a different sensor dish on the Enterprise. It was really very smooth and clean. It was compound curves. It was really nice. And then they decided to do this whole sequence, so they built this set. Well, this set's all plywood and flat stuff, and so we had to go out with the Enterprise on stage on the motion control rig, cut out a section of the whole bottom for about maybe 14, 15 inches, all the way to the sides. Take that out without moving the model, so we didn't disrupt anything. Put the one in that matches the set and blend that back in. And we had to do it overnight, so it was ready to shoot again the next day.
Oh, that's a trip.
Yeah. And it was funny too because the Enterprise, before the first time they ever photographed that model, it was for the poster, and they sent somebody up, and the model wasn't finished. I mean, we were just dying, and our laser cutter had caught on fire, and that was destroyed, and we didn't have a sensor dish for it. We basically had the ship together so that mostly it was there, but it didn't. It had some panels missing on the back of the neck, so from the back you're just seeing the neons inside of it. And they photographed it like that, and it was on the poster where it's racing away from the Borg cube. You can see the neons inside the model, but the sensor dish, we didn't have one, and we had changed the sensor dish on the Excelsior. When we made the Excelsior into the Enterprise B, it got a different sensor dish, and I had the Excelsior sensor dish in my toolbox. And I remember I took that thing out of the toolbox and I threw it to Brian Dewey, who was about 20 feet away. I said, "Take that, put it on a lathe, turn it down until it goes in that hole." So when they did the shots for the poster, it had this blue sensor dish, the Excelsior. And that was the only time that was ever there, but it had 3 different sensor dishes over its lifetime.
Oh, damn. And
it's funny too. Prop store, somebody bought it. Adam Schneider owned it, and then somebody who owns a game company bought the Enterprise E. And they called me and they said, "We've noticed something on the ship." And I'm like, "What is it?" And they go, "Well, there's a conference room on top of the saucer towards the front. There are 4 windows, and you can look down into it. And there's an actual conference room in there, and there's a chalk outline on the floor." And I'm like, "Yeah, there is." And they said, "What is that?" And I said, "Well, me being kind of bored, but this whole conference room is like an inch by, 7/8 of an inch, and little table, chalk outline on the floor. And
That's
there's
funny.
there's a little park light at the back of the neck. There's some long windows back there, and actually built a little dimensional park with trees and bottom-lit water pools and pathways. Really neat, but stuff you'll never see." The other thing was they wanted to be able to see in the windows, and so what we ended up doing was there was an interactive manual for the Enterprise D that was on CD-ROM back then. We took that, and they had photographs of the different rooms, and we took those, and our still photo guys, they photographed the monitor with that picture on it. So we had slides printed of all of these different rooms, and then we got some 1/4-inch plexiglass, and we used a 1/4-round bit. And plexiglass was, they're pretty small, but they were kind of slide format, and we did a 1/4 round around the back of it, so there were no edges, so you wouldn't see edges if you looked into it. And then we painted the perimeter black. We put a piece of diffusion in it. We put the slide on there, and then we used packing tape to seal that together. And it went behind the windows. And the windows themselves, we laser cut. Had this done in Menlo Park. Laser cut a piece of 16th-inch plexiglass that was a frame, and then 32nd of an inch clear windows that we could put in there. So that way we didn't have a light leak around it. We had a perfectly clear window that was really thin. Put all that together and backlit it, and you had depth. You could look into that. Because you're looking back almost a 1/2 inch to the slide, and so you could move around and look through the window and see depth to it. Yeah. So we had never done that.
That's for CD-ROM. I love that dropped.
Well, typically all the Star Trek stuff, the windows just glowed. There wasn't anything in them; it glowed.
Right.
The motion picture Enterprise had some slides in it, but by the time we were doing Star Trek 6, they had so faded that they basically weren't there anymore.
Yeah.
So, but it's funny, on Mandalorian on season 2, Moff Gideon's, the light cruiser that Moff Gideon had, which is basically a Star Destroyer, had this really complicated bridge, and I made it all by hand, and it's maybe 5 inches wide, something like that. And I had thought enough beforehand. It had these bridge wings that stuck out. I made the backs of those these doors that would come open, so that I could get in there. And not too long before we're going to shoot it, John Knoll said, "We're going to need an interior in there." I'm like, "Really?" Because I assumed we'd have glowing windows. So I wound up getting acrylic, 1/2-inch acrylic, and taking a Dremel tool and carving shapes into it that look like consoles and things like that, and making a recess that you could put a 9 or 5 millimeter LED into. And I made 3. I made a center one, and I made one for each bridge wing. And then I painted them silver, painted them black, and then went back with exactly scratched areas off and took Sharpies and colored it. And you plug the LED into it, and you get all these little lights and things like that. Put it up inside that, and it really looks interesting. You don't know what the hell it is, but it looks really complicated. But that was kind of interesting. We don't do that. The other thing that was weird about that thing was that it had hangar bays down below. And we've seen that glowing perimeter on the landing bays, like when you're in the Death Star and you see the Falcon coming in.
Yeah.
That's been a part of the landing base, but it's never been on one of the models that I'm aware of. The landing bays on this ship had that glowing perimeter thing. That was a real pain in the ass to make that work, too. They make these filament LEDs. Well, they make these filament LEDs now that it would have been perfect for it, but they didn't have them then. So,
Exactly.
yeah. Yeah, it was funny. The sensor dish piece, the center thing. Because this, like I said, this was late edition. I had to make a model of that like in a day.
Yeah.
For this shot, you'll see it drifting away here.
Right.
And it was like it was done like that.
Blowed it up.
Was the sensor dish a character too?
Got rid of it.
No, I'm gonna have to say he's gonna shoot it, right? Yeah, that's it. That's our one-day model.
Wow.
It's not a character anymore.
Yeah, right. He's a day player.
Literally.
Yeah. So we're very excited, obviously, to have you join us next week. We got a great crew coming out with you: Hal Hickel, Lauren Vogt, Kate Savaker, Bill Kimberlin, Andrew Nelson. What are you hoping that our fans are going to be getting out of the experience when they get to see you and everybody talk about your experiences?
Well, I hope they like talking about it as much as I do, because I love talking about it. It's fun, and it's kind of crazy. I've been doing this I've been working with ILM in some capacity for 36 years now. So I've been doing this a long time, but it doesn't seem like all that long at the same time. And I still love doing it. And I'm so excited that we get to do stuff like the TV shows. Because, we've done the ship, we did the Razor Crest, we did the Light Cruiser, we did Ahsoka ship, and we did the ship for Skeleton Crew, which will come out this Christmas. Right. And that's been a blast. And it's funny because John Knoll, John wrote Photoshop, he and his brother. Mm-hmm. John's got an Academy Award for Pirates. He was the effects soup on all the prequels. He is so accomplished and so smart. But when we were out there on stage shooting those models, and I said to him, I think it was on season 2, I said, why we're both here? And he goes, what do you mean? I said, the reason you came from Michigan and the reason I came from North Carolina and why we're here right now. And he goes, what are you talking about? I said, we came out here because we wanted to shoot spaceship models on stage. He goes, yeah, you're right. You're right. That's the reason we both got in the business, was just to do that. And we're fortunate enough we're still doing it. And we have a really good time in the process too. And it's very seat of the pants when we're doing that. We have minimal amount of equipment, and we've got usually 3 people on the stage, and that's about it. So I hope people like talking about it as much as I do, because I will talk a lot.
Well, I've done several of these shows with the guys. I'm kind of like the fill-in guy, and the easiest shows to do are the ones that you just kind of like press the button, start, and they just share their whole universe with you. It makes it great because we don't have to come up with questions or try and think of things that we need to get from you. It's just like, yes, here we go. This guy's going to give us everything we want. This has been enjoyable. I have to say, John, that the behind the scenes stories are great about, oh, hey, we had to cut this out. We had to do this. This is how we built that, and those stories are great. And that's what everybody wants to hear. And that's why they watch this stuff.
Oh, it's
Definitely.
funny. See, there's the sunglass holder that's behind them. Turned upside down, but you can see where the sunglasses go. I'm like, yeah, okay.
Cochrane's Warp Ship, brought to you by Sunglass Hut.
Well, I love doing this stuff, and like I said, when I was 3 years old, saw Lost in Space, I was kind of hooked right then. And when Lucasfilm, they started making Star Wars, and ILM existed, there was a place to kind of focus on. I want to go work there,
Right.
and I was lucky enough to get there. A lot of people want to work there, and I got hired for a week, and it turned into I was there for 31 years before I retired from there.
Nice.
And I'm working for him as a contractor, so it's like, yeah, I feel incredibly lucky, and then I've enjoyed every bit of it. Some of the every job's got its bad parts, but for the most part, it's been fantastic. And getting to work with just really cool stuff and really great people. And one of the neat things about ILM too is that you've got a lot of more in the practical days. You got a very diverse group of people that came from all different walks of life with all different experiences. And that was the really interesting thing. People would come in with some crazy ass thing and go, how much? And we'd sit down and kind of go through it. And, we'd come back with a number and like, well, it's what Steve Dolly, and Steve started in 75 on the first film. Steve used to call it swag, scientific wild ass guess, because you may have done something kind of like it, but you haven't done what they're asking for, but you can apply what you learned. And people bring that broad experience all to that thing. And I used to feel like the model shop was like this machine. They could input something on this side, you're going to get something on that side. But yeah, it's such a talented group of people too.
It's like a perfect storm.
Yeah.
So how many times were you end up being a Jedi? I know you had to throw in a row.
I was only a Jedi once. Well, that's not true, because I stood in for Samuel L. Jackson in one scene, and they called me and they said, we need you to stand in. I'm like, I don't look like Samuel Jackson, right? They're like, yeah, we know that. Just come over here. And I'm like, it was an over-the-shoulder shot of Yoda. So they just needed me to just have my shoulder in there. But then John Duncan and I were Jedis in front of the Jedi temple thing. And I got pictures of us in the get-ups, and they shot us on blue screen. I've never actually sat down and tried to figure out where we are. And maybe we're not in it. I don't know if we made it or not. But then we got to be the Imperial Guards, the Blue Guards.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Those costumes suck.
Very rigid.
Well, the face will come out of the helmet, which is nice because the red ones didn't do that. But the blue ones, you could take the face out, which is good because we're all about to die. Because it's just a big vacuum formed plastic thing with no openings in it. And you got a big robe on. And trying to get a bunch of guys that don't know how to march together was really interesting.
That was during Phantom Menace, right? The final scene.
Yeah, Phantom Menace.
That's funny.
Yeah, that was one of the fun things too back when we were a practical company, because like Star Trek Generations, we got to be some of the people that were on the saucer when Viridian blows up, and in Star Trek 6, I was one of the Klingons in the Klingon courtroom. We're up in the foreground looking down into the Klingon courtroom, and I was a Russian sailor in the special edition of the Abyss. I mean, that was normal stuff. It'd be like, hey, you want to come out at lunch and do this thing? Like, what are we doing? Pirates. Okay, great. Let's go be pirates. But it didn't happen as much once it became a digital company. But when something that was funny, it happened. They were working on, there's a Mark Wahlberg movie about the oil rig that blew up out in the Gulf. I can't remember the name of the damn movie.
Yeah.
Deepwater Horizon.
Yeah. Deepwater Horizon. Yep.
So they came to me and they said, hey, can you wear this costume? Because you're the right size for this costume. And it was the guy who was the crane operator on the rig. So I was like, yeah. So, and I wasn't on that show, but I put on his costume. We go down to the stage and I do the T-pose, and they photograph me every 5 degrees turning and everything. They get all that stuff. And the idea was it's costume reference. So about 6 weeks later, I get a phone call. Well, first I get a digital fax comes in on my screen, and it's the costume. And I'm just looking, I'm like, yeah, okay, yeah. The vendor they used in China didn't model the actor, they modeled me.
Hmm.
So it's me in the costume, and I'm like, and they were like, it's you, and I'm like, what happened? And they're like, yeah, they didn't follow the directions. They modeled you. So there's a digital model of me that's in the database now, and they said everybody gets killed on the rig is me. And then in Transformers 4, I'm a Marine in this tactical SWAT gear stuff, and I'm like, I'd like hazard pay or something. At least you're going to be killing me in every movie. It doesn't, I'm not going to die. I'm one of those people that AI has already stolen me.
Right.
Yeah. It's funny, these gold ships, John Hughes made these, and he had the Enterprise B, which was a Playmates toy, and there's a company in LA that will dip stuff in a low temperature alloy that looks gold. And so John took the Playmates Enterprise B down there and they dipped it. Well, it shorted out the sound card in the thing and had batteries in it. And there was no way to open it anymore. And so he had to put it in the back room for about 10 days until it stopped doing phaser sounds endlessly.
That's fantastic.
That's funny.
I love this whole reference to Moby Dick and Picard to Ahab.
Yeah. I have not been paying attention to the movie. Is the missile taken off yet?
It's coming up soon.
Yeah.
We got about a half 20 minutes left of the movie or so.
It's pretty soon.
It's coming up soon. So Cochran will.
The missile is about 7 feet long. The missile is about 7 feet long, and it was all skinned in aluminum and stainless steel tape.
Oh, trippy.
Yeah.
Used some sort of aluminum tape for the Razor Crest as well, right?
Sure did.
Yeah. How was the process of doing that? Is that, I would think it'd be a lot of like cutting like along the compound edges, and
it's
you
really
wouldn't want it to overlap too much, right?
Yeah,
it looks great.
Overlap just enough to get a little bit of a scene, but
Right.
I love doing it.
It looks amazing.
Yeah, it works really, really well. And the great thing is, you can take. One of my favorite tricks: take a mechanical pencil and take the lead out of it, and you get that little tiny cylinder, and you can push it in and make rivets, and it makes a little ring with a raised rivet in it. It looks great.
Perfect. That's amazing.
What material was the base made out of on that?
That thing, this is a 3D print.
Yeah.
And it was about 52 pieces, and it was problematic because all the pieces were printed at different angles, and so the build lines are in all these different ranges.
A lot of finishing.
Yeah, it wasn't that high a resolution, so it was like they're like, "Can't you film this?" I'm like, "No." The 3D print is not tough enough to withstand being on stage. Because stage models get manhandled a lot because you have to remount them, you have to change the mount rod. And this is walking up to the model mover and pulling it out of the mover, and then going and getting the rod out of it, and then having to open up different doors, reroute the electronics, put the rod back in it, reassemble it, put it back on the mover. It's pretty tough, and 3D prints are not strong enough to hold up to that.
Right.
So I took this thing and put it all together and had to just soak it in sandable primer, and then sand between to fill in all those build lines, because I'm going to skin it with aluminum. If the build lines are there, they will telegraph through the aluminum. That's what you're going to see. So this thing was a mess. So it was a lot of work, and it was done quickly, and it was within the time frame what we had, but it was a lot of cleanup. And I ended up making a big 2-part mold of the whole fuselage, and they're recasting epoxy fiberglass because the 3D print. They wanted to 3D print the mount doors that you have to put on. Well, the mount doors have to be invisible. They have to snap fit. You can't see them. You can't drill the 3D print. It explodes. And they printed the doors, and the doors come in they're curved. They're not flat. I'm like, I'll just remake the whole thing and redo it in epoxy fiberglass. This thing, the finish one, you kick it across the room pretty much.
There's a scene that we just saw a little bit ago, and it's when they're all going into the escape pods, and the doors come up. Yeah. And you ever seen those things that you put on top of the roof of a car, the cargo things? Tell me that's not. Is that one of those like it's like the lid to a cargo holder, and it's just coming up. And I was like I swear to God, I've seen those on.
It looks like a hood scoop off a semi, maybe. I don't know, but it looks weird. And there's that little thin wire that looks so wanky that's pulling them up.
I've seen them like on top of people's, SUVs and stuff, the little cargo holders, and I thought, God, that looks exactly like one of them.
It probably was.
That's crazy.
So all that fire and smoke, it's all digital.
Oh, how big was that model?
That model's about 7 feet from top to bottom.
Hmm.
And we actually took that model and cut it apart and turned it into the one that you actually see the Cochrane ship come out of.
Right.
So here it was complete, and then we had to cut it up and re-rig it to do the other shot. And that sequence, we shot that in 3 pieces. We had the back, the second stage, we had the front stage, and that actually had the Cochrane ship in it, and it had stepper motors that opened the 4 pieces. So it was all done as a practical effect. And they used to show this on every episode of Enterprise.
Huh. It's very Star Trek-y here with that, from a rocket to an interesting shaped ship.
Yeah.
So that's what Sherry said. It looks like the SpaceX.
That's some inspiration.
It's so funny now we're seeing that stuff and it's real. Watch SpaceX. It's amazing what we're seeing.
So I was at a small con, New Jersey, 5 days after Shatner went up in the SpaceX, and he was at this con 5 days later, and that's all he could talk about.
Would probably
he seemed almost traumatized by it.
Yeah.
All he talked about was, all I saw was death. It's just death. And, made him realize how precious the earth is. And, he's talking about
he was literally, all about that. But he was just like, it was the biggest life-changing experience I've ever had in my, ever.
Yeah.
He talks about that in depth in that documentary that just came out, Call Me Bill.
How is that?
It's pretty good. It's I saw a screening of it, and he did a Q&A. I believe it was after. It was after we'd already seen the movie. So he talked about things that we'd seen in the movie. But he did reiterate that whole thing about being in space and looking out one way and not seeing anything. And then when he turned around, he was like, oh, wow, there it is.
Yeah.
And seeing the actual Earth. But I enjoyed it. I actually saw it twice in theaters.
Yeah.
It's kind of it talks about a lot of his life, but then it kind of concentrates more towards recent stuff. So
it's funny how active he is. He's like 93.
Yeah.
And he's at almost every Comic-Con every single weekend.
He's doing that hardcore now.
And people are lined up, in big numbers to get him to get an autograph.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. He's making a lot of money. It was funny because when we were refurbishing the Enterprise at the Smithsonian, we were at Udvar Hazy, which is the big museum out at Dulles. And he had, when the Smithsonian announced they were going to do that, he got on Twitter and he was like, well, I hope you do a better job than the last time. And it was this whole thing. It was kind of pretty negative. And we're working on this thing at night. And Margaret Whiteycamp was the person who was in charge of that project. And she was going to some event in D.C. that Shatner was going to be at. And I said, you bring his ass back here. We're going to be here. You can come in here and see the Enterprise. You can see what we're doing. And she came back later that night, and she looked really downtrodden. And she had a picture of her and him, and he just looked pissed off. He's like, he didn't want to come. And his people told me if we weren't going to pay him, he wasn't going to come. And I'm like, well, that's the difference between Captain Kirk and William Shatner.
Yeah.
So true.
Well, there's always sort of been, the Shatner behind Captain Kirk that people are, not kind of cool with, or he's not cool with them, or whatever.
And I also
go ahead.
I mean, I always thought it was very fascinating, like talking about the con circuit, is he just raised his prices that he was at like $100 for the last like 20 years for an autograph, and he's now up to 120. And I see someone like Mark Hamill, who's charging like $300, $350 for an autograph, and I'm like, but Kirk's been around longer than Luke Skywalker.
Yeah, and Shatner's not going to be here that much longer, so better get him now.
Yeah.
Well,
That was
the way we look at it right now as well is that he got divorced in the last 5 years, so he's like trying to catch up some of that money, I guess, that he had to give up in alimony or something.
I don't know. I think he's just into being busy all the time.
Once you're like in your 90s, you're getting divorced. Like, what's the point?
Yeah. Despite the escape pods that we saw earlier.
Yeah.
Alex Yeager did some sketches for that, and Bill George actually built a reference model that was about maybe 10, 11 inches across. And then that was digitally modeled, and so those were all digital when you see them coming out. But Bill George did that, which is really nice.
I know this isn't your territory, John, but do you see the lights in her head lighting up?
A little looks like
Yeah, there's some attention to detail there.
some.
At first, I thought it was
Fiber optics
moisture,
or
like
something.
reflection of moisture. And then I realized she's got little LEDs in her head.
Huh. I never even noticed them.
Yeah, it does almost look like a reflection, but you can see the pattern and where it's coming from.
Alice Krige did such a great job as the War Queen.
Well, I was going to say it's kind of interesting because we've seen one or two other people play the Borg Queen now.
Yep.
And it's been kind of interesting. That woman that was on the card, and she passed away right after she did that.
Oh, wow. And don't forget Alison Pill, who took over to the Borg Queen as part of that season 2.
Yeah, and she's the one that died.
Wow. Season 3 was fantastic. I absolutely enjoyed that immensely.
Well, season 3 is what everybody wanted. It was more Next Generation.
Yeah. Absolutely was.
I was really surprised when they brought the Enterprise D back. I'm like, really? And then I think Otoy did all these renders of the actual recovery of the saucer and everything. And it was really cool.
Oh yeah, that was like the, you brought the band back together, and then you have the one cast member that you never thought was going to come back, and they came back.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't expect that thing to come back.
Yeah. No, but it was great. It was like I said, like you said, it was like watching the Next Generation again for the next, for continuation, and also being able to, leave it open ended but have some closure at the same time.
It's interesting. I mean, there's all that talk about Star Trek Legacy, but I don't know if that'll ever turn into anything. But it's interesting. I was down at the warehouse where they store all the props, and 30-something years ago, I was, on Next Generation sets, and we were up on the bridge, and I was talking to Mike Akuda, and I said, how is your flat panel technology? What is this? Show me what's going on. And at the back of the bridge, there are 4 or 5 of these little consoles that have a screen on them, and they roll out. So he rolled one of them out, and it was a piece of plexiglass, a piece of artwork that's black and transparent, some diffused, some colored gels, and then this polarizing film. And there was a whole catalog. I ordered the catalog after I was down there of all these different shapes. And the way they oriented the polarizing is printed. It's printed on the front. So if you turn a polarizing wheel, it actually has a direction to it. And so that's all it was. There was a polarizing wheel behind it. There's about a fluorescent tube, one of those U-shaped fluorescent tubes, and that's all it is. And it looks so good. And flash forward like 30-something years, and I'm in the warehouse, and I'm walking around, and there's consoles and stuff that are from whatever the main ship was in season 3 of Picard. I can't remember the name of the thing, but Triton or something like that. Titan. It was the Titan.
Yeah.
And I'm walking by, and there's a console, and it's got a curved piece of, looks like plexiglass, like maybe 3/8 of an inch thick, about 40 inches wide, maybe about 20 inches tall. And I said, is this a prop? And they said, no, that screen actually works. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? It's a clear, full color monitor. It costs $10,000, and it actually works.
Wow.
So it blew my mind that 30 years ago, I'm looking at this fake flat screen stuff they're using, and now they have actual technology that looks like damn witchcraft. Really impressive. And some of those clear panel displays they've got these big ones that are like floor to ceiling, and they're mounting them so they're oriented rectangularly oriented floor to ceiling. And there was one that was in an art exposition, and what they're doing, they were doing colored paint pouring from the ceiling and filling the monitor, and it looks unbelievable, and it's just amazing. I can't imagine what that cost, but
Right.
it's phenomenal technology. There's some talk of taking some matte paintings that are painted on glass and putting those in front of the clear monitor, and be able to take the footage that you saw in the film and put it on the clear monitor so it won't interfere with the matte painting. So you can see it all in context, actually moving.
That's incredible.
Cool.
No. Yeah, some of these effects are definitely mid 90s.
Yeah, that stuff on Data, I never was too fond of all this.
Yeah, that was.
Just put some blinking LEDs on it. It'll look like a robot. I'm like, yeah. Never.
And the Borg Queen's
Into
demise.
her exoskeleton. It's dominating.
It's funny. I think that's that stage where the engineering section they've got there is the same one from Next Generation. I can't imagine they probably just redressed it, but that tied up almost an entire stage by itself.
Oh,
that
wow.
was huge. Well, there's that work core that you see in front of you. There's another one behind. There's a whole second one behind it. It doesn't light up. It's wrapped in like a thermal blanket. But that set, it went up into the ceiling of the stage. It was enormous. It's funny. That's like on Deep Space Nine. I was over there, and their kind of control room was amazingly small. When you're in it, you're like, this. It looks huge on TV. It is really small.
Right.
And then the Defiant, the bridge of the Defiant, I could put it in my living room. This really tiny space.
I remember when, I went to visit the set of Saturday Night Live when I was in high school, and I couldn't believe how small that was. So I can just imagine, it's like, it looks so much bigger, when you're watching on television.
It's pretty funny. It's funny how the bridge of the Enterprise D, that was big. That was a really big space. And if you ever got to go to the thing in Las Vegas.
Oh yeah, I went to the Star Trek Experience one time.
Yeah, walking on that, I felt exactly like I did when I was on the set. It was like that was a beautiful, really, really nicely done piece. But the design of that was so cool. It was funny because where that was, we were walking in and out of that through the view screen. The view screen's right at floor level. So you just walk right out through it.
Oh, wow.
Lots of lights on Data there. It's weird because you'd think those would go through his skin or something.
Yeah, wouldn't you?
I mean, traditionally, skin is translucent, right? So, for the most part.
Kind of that whole thing with the fake skin where she's putting it on him, and that whole thing seems kind of weird. It doesn't seem well thought out.
Weird sort of, that relationship with them is pretty bizarre too.
Yeah. But he's really trying to become more human, understandable.
Yeah, I was in Richmond earlier this year, John, at a GalaxyCon, and the convention center was in maybe what could be considered a little bit of a sketchy part of town. And so I had forgot some stuff at home, and I Googled up the closest pharmacy, which was, as I said, that G word, my phone popped on. But and so I walked down to get some stuff. And as I'm coming back, I'm looking down the street from where I came from, and there's this guy walking down the street, and I realize how kind of sketchy it is, and I realize it's Brent Spiner's walking towards me. And so I looked at him and I said, "Do you know where you're going?" He's like, "Oh yeah, I'm fine. Like oh, you're some fan. I don't want to have a hang on her." But I was just kind of more worried about
Fortunately, getting into the wrong part of town.
It's like it's a little sketchy down there. Be careful is what I wanted to say, but
Was that Richmond, Virginia?
Yeah.
Okay. I was gonna say Richmond, California. Yeah, that'd be sketchy.
No, it was Richmond, and it was sketchy too.
Yeah.
talking about Jonathan Frakes, my stepson. We went to Dallas to go to a con, and I took my daughter-in-law, turned 30 this year. That was a birthday present for her, so she could meet David Tennant because she's a big Doctor Who fan.
Wow.
And my stepson Jacob has made his own. He was stationed in the Air Force in Germany, and while he was there, he sewed a complete next generation costume, a uniform. It's got all the right markings. He 3D printed a phaser, and he also 3D printed a what do they call the little forget him. But anyways, the costume's quite exact. He found his mom bought him a pair of boots that looks just like the ones from the Next Generation. Anyways, he went up to say hi to. He got a picture and blinked his eyes, and the picture didn't come out good. And he got up to Jonathan Frakes and just fanboyed and couldn't talk to him. And so his wife started talking for him, hoping that he was going to pick it up and then take over. And he never did. So he went back to him and he said, I was just really, overcome and so forth. And Jonathan was like, no, it's no problem. Let's go get you a new picture. Spent there, talked to him for like 15 minutes, about being neurodivergent. And he said, I imagine you really relate to the Data character and so forth. And so I have to say I was very appreciative of his kindness to Jacob.
You know what? I've only been around him a few times, and he's been super, super nice. And he came to when they were shooting an episode of NCIS. I work at the Battleship Iowa as a volunteer down in Southern California, and they were shooting there, and everybody just adored him. I mean, he was a big hit with everybody on the crew. So I never heard anything but good things about him. So. I always wonder is how did they land the Cochrane ship?
Yeah.
I mean,
do you think the first alien encounter they have is low-hanging fruit for them to just say, we're going to do a Vulcan?
You say it again? You're a little distorted.
Oh, I was saying that, do you think it was low-hanging fruit to say, the first alien that Cochrane's going to talk to is going to be a Vulcan? That's like obvious.
Yeah. Probably why they did it.
Yeah.
But everybody, the object is to get people to want to come and see it. So, what's the low-hanging fruit? Yeah, that's what people,
Well, we laugh about this all the time when Luke Skywalker shows up in Mandalorian on Gideon's Star Cruiser. We're all for saying we want to be someone else, and we'll see the X-Wing. We're like, yeah, it's Luke.
Yeah. It's funny because ILM did not work on those shots. Another company they subcontracted did it, and they weren't. I don't think they're all that happy. And then some guy did a deep fake in like a week, and it looked way better, and so they hired him.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Yeah,
that's funny.
So by the time they brought back Mark for Book of Boba Fett, they were, it was that guy doing the deep fake for.
Yep. Yeah, his version was very. It was, a little bit a step above the original broadcast version.
Wasn't he young? Wasn't he like 13 or something like that?
He was, I believe, a teenager.
Wow.
Yeah.
On Rogue One, they spent probably a year working on the Carrie Fisher and and the Moff Tarkin things, and I thought Moff Tarkin was pretty successful. She was only one shot, and to me, it just didn't quite work. It's
a little off.
Hope, and she just looked strange, and it was like
a little stiff.
Well,
yeah.
digital humans.
I know Hal worked on the Tarkin one.
Well, it's funny. I mean, there are things that we don't even realize. It's funny. This shot was done by Matt World Digital, which was owned by Craig Barron at the time. There are things that we don't even realize that we're seeing when we're looking at people's faces. There's all this information that we get that you can't even categorize. And when you do a digital one, the digital one, there's like, well, we got 5 levers we can move, and really there are about 60 things. So it looks very strange, and it's hard to really figure out what is wrong with it. Why doesn't it look right? But that's what they call the uncanny valley.
Right.
motion capture stuff. It's funny because I worked on A Christmas Carol with Jim Carrey, and it was that whole big Zemeckis thing, and we had facial capture. We had 4 cameras on their faces, so they got a lot of the facial capture data, but still it tends to look strange. There's just so much happening. There was a guy that came to ILM and he did this presentation about expression, and he turned around to the audience, put his back to the audience, and he would make expressions, and he goes, "What am I doing?" And you could tell he's smiling. You can't see his face, but you can tell by his body language what's happening,
Right.
And there's so much information we get that we're not even able to quantify, but it's there. And these digital doubles, it's a tough thing to make it work. Every now and then it works really great, but usually it's a little odd. But it makes me think about, my friend Howie, he did rubber creatures, Gremlins, The Fly, that sort of thing. You shoot that and you get these little snippets that work. But as a whole, it doesn't work. But, if you can find those little sweet spots, that's what sells it, But this is kind of the same thing, I think, with digital humans. It's a tough thing to replicate, if not almost impossible to really get it.
Well, John, thank you first and foremost. Thank you so much for coming on with us tonight and watching.
Great stories.
Absolutely fantastic stories.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I hope it was fun. I had a good time.
No, great. And we look forward to seeing you in San Francisco next Thursday, a week from today.
1 week, yes.
Which is incredible that that it's coming up this quickly because we've been planning this for so long. But we look forward to meeting you next week. And everybody out there, we look forward to seeing you. We have a whole contingent over in San Diego for Con right now, and we start bright and early on Monday for the trip. So we'll have a lot of coverage here on the Virtual Cantina Network of all of our stops and everywhere we're going to go. Skip, anything you want to say before we head out?
I am looking forward to hanging out with all the family.
Yeah, this will be great. Jeff?
Want to acknowledge our sponsors for this trip coming up, Hyperspace Props. And if you want to get some amazing pieces, cosplay items, sabacc cards, credits, dice, check them out and use our code Bunta for 10% off. And they'll be in person in early next week on Monday with us at Scum and Villainy. So if you want to purchase things there should be some things available, and it's going to be pretty cool, I think.
Excellent. So John, can't wait to see you next week, my friend.
Yeah, it'll be good to see you guys in person. It'll be great.
Yes, definitely.
So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And from all of us here, we have to say, live long and prosper.
Don't honk the Trek.